Part Two, Chapter 7, Section 2a of The Possessed by Fyodor Dostoevsky, translated by Constance Garnett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Part Two, Chapter 7, A Meeting, Section 2a. With conspicuous nonchalance Verhovensky lounged in the chair at the upper end of the table, almost without greeting anyone. His expression was disdainful and even haughty. Stavrogin bowed politely, but in spite of the fact that they were all only waiting for them, everybody, as though acting on instruction, appeared scarcely to notice them. The lady of the house turned severely to Stavrogin as soon as he was seated. "Stavrogin, will you have tea?" "Please," he answered. "Tea for Stavrogin," she commanded her sister at the samovar. "And you, will you?" This was to Verhovensky. "Of course. What a question to ask a visitor! And give me cream too. You always give one such filthy stuff by way of tea, and with a name day party in the house." "What, you believe in keeping name days too?" the girl student laughed suddenly. "We were just talking of that." "That's stale," muttered the schoolboy at the other end of the table. "What's stale? To disregard conventions, even the most innocent, is not stale. On the contrary, to the disgrace of every one, so far it's a novelty," the girl student answered instantly, darting forward on her chair. "Besides, there are no innocent conventions," she added with intensity. "I only meant," cried the schoolboy with tremendous excitement, "to say that though conventions of course are stale and must be eradicated, yet about name days everybody knows that they are stupid and very stale to waste precious time upon, which has been wasted already all over the world, so that it would be as well to sharpen one's wits on something more useful." "You drag it out so, one can't understand what you mean," shouted the girl. "I think that every one has a right to express an opinion as well as every one else, and if I want to express my opinion like anybody else..." "No one is attacking your right to give an opinion," the lady of the house herself cut in sharply. "You are only asked not to ramble, because no one can make out what you mean." "But allow me to remark that you are not treating me with respect. If I couldn't fully express my thought, it's not from want of thought, but from too much thought," the schoolboy muttered, almost in despair, losing his thread completely. "If you don't know how to talk, you'd better keep quiet," blurted out the girl. The schoolboy positively jumped from his chair. "I only wanted to state," he shouted, crimson with shame and afraid to look about him, "that you only wanted to show off your cleverness because Mr. Stavrogin came in. So there!" "That's a nasty and immoral idea, and shows the worthlessness of your development. I beg you not to address me again," the girl rattled off. "Stavrogin," began the lady of the house, "they've been discussing the rights of the family before you came. This officer here," she nodded towards her relation the major, "and of course I am not going to worry you with such stale nonsense which has been dealt with long ago. But how have the rights and duties of the family come about in the superstitious form in which they exist at present? That's the question. What's your opinion?" "What do you mean by 'come about'?" Stavrogin asked in his turn. "We know, for instance, that the superstition about God came from thunder and lightning." The girl student rushed into the fray again, staring at Stavrogin with her eyes almost jumping out of her head. "It's well known that primitive man, scared by thunder and lightning, made a god of the unseen enemy, feeling their weakness before it. But how did the superstition of the family arise? How did the family itself arise?" "That's not quite the same thing," Madame Virginsky tried to check her. "I think the answer to this question wouldn't be quite discreet," answered Stavrogin. "How so?" said the girl student, craning forward suddenly. But there was an audible titter in the group of teachers, which was at once caught up at the other end by Lyamshin and the schoolboy, and followed by a hoarse chuckle from the major. "You ought to write vaudevilles," Madame Virginsky observed to Stavrogin. "It does you no credit. I don't know what your name is," the girl rapped out with positive indignation. "And don't you be too forward," boomed the major. "You are a young lady and you ought to behave modestly. And you keep jumping about as though you were sitting on a needle." "Kindly hold your tongue and don't address me familiarly with your nasty comparisons. I've never seen you before, and I don't recognise the relationship." "But I am your uncle. I used to carry you about when you were a baby." "I don't care what babies you used to carry about. I didn't ask you to carry me. It must have been a pleasure to you to do so, you rude officer. And allow me to observe, don't dare to address me so familiarly unless it's as a fellow citizen. I forbid you to do it, once for all." "There, they are all like that!" cried the Major, banging the table with his fist and addressing Stavrogin, who was sitting opposite. "But allow me. I am fond of liberalism and modern ideas, and I am fond of listening to clever conversation. Masculine conversation, though, I warn you. But to listen to these women, these nightly windmills, no, that makes me ache all over. Don't wriggle about," he shouted to the girl, who was leaping up from her chair. "No, it's my turn to speak. I've been insulted." "You can't say anything yourself and only hinder other people talking," the lady of the house grumbled indignantly. "No, I will have my say," said the Major hotly, addressing Stavrogin. "I reckon on you, Mr. Stavrogin, as a fresh person who has only just come on the scene, though I haven't the honour of knowing you. Without men they'll perish like flies, that's what I think. All their woman question is only lack of originality. I assure you that all this woman question has been invented for them by men in foolishness and to their own hurt. I only thank God I am not married. There's not the slightest variety in them. They can't even invent a simple pattern. They have to get men to invent them for them. Here I used to carry her in my arms, used to dance the mazurka with her when she was 10 years old. To day she's come, naturally I fly to embrace her, and at the second word she tells me there's no God. She might have waited a little, she was in too great a hurry. Clever people don't believe, I dare say, but that's from their cleverness. 'But you, chicken, what do you know about God?' I said to her. 'Some student taught you, and if he'd taught you to light the lamp before the ikons you would have lighted it.'" "You keep telling lies. You are a very spiteful person. I proved to you just now the untenability of your position," the girl answered contemptuously, as though disdaining further explanations with such a man. "I told you just now that we've all been taught in the catechism, if you honour your father and your parents you will live long and have wealth. That's in the Ten Commandments. If God thought it necessary to offer rewards for love, your God must be immoral. That's how I proved it to you. It wasn't the second word, and it was because you asserted your rights. It's not my fault if you are stupid and don't understand even now. You are offended and you are spiteful, and that's what explains all your generation." "You're a goose," said the Major. "And you are a fool." "You can call me names?" "Excuse me, Kapiton Maximitch, you told me yourself you don't believe in God," Liputin piped from the other end of the table. "What if I did say so? That's a different matter. I believe, perhaps, only not altogether. Even if I don't believe altogether, still I don't say God ought to be shot. I used to think about God before I left the Hussars. From all the poems you would think that Hussars do nothing but carouse and drink. Yes, I did drink, maybe, but would you believe it? I used to jump out of bed at night and stood crossing myself before the images with nothing but my socks on, praying to God to give me faith. For even then I couldn't be at peace as to whether there was a God or not. It used to fret me so. In the morning, of course, one would amuse oneself and one's faith would seem to be lost again. And in fact I've noticed that faith always seems to be less in the daytime." "Haven't you any cards?" asked Verhovensky with a mighty yawn, addressing Madame Virginsky. "I sympathise with your question, I sympathise entirely," the girl student broke in hotly, flushed with indignation at the Major's words. "We are wasting precious time listening to silly talk," snapped out the lady of the house, and she looked reprovingly at her husband. The girl pulled herself together. "I wanted to make a statement to the meeting concerning the sufferings of the students and their protest, but as time is being wasted in immoral conversation..." "There's no such thing as moral or immoral," the schoolboy brought out, unable to restrain himself as soon as the girl began. "I knew that, Mr. Schoolboy, long before you were taught it." "And I maintain," he answered savagely, "that you are a child come from Petersburg to enlighten us all, though we know for ourselves the commandment 'Honour thy father and thy mother,' which you could not repeat correctly, and the fact that it's immoral every one in Russia knows from Byelinsky." "Are we ever to have an end of this?" Madame Virginsky said resolutely to her husband. As the hostess she blushed for the ineptitude of the conversation, especially as she noticed smiles and even astonishment among the guests who had been invited for the first time. "Gentlemen," said Virginsky, suddenly lifting up his voice, "if anyone wishes to say anything more nearly connected with our business, or has any statement to make, I call upon him to do so without wasting time." "I'll venture to ask one question," said the lame teacher suavely. He had been sitting particularly decorously, and had not spoken till then. "I should like to know, are we some sort of meeting, or are we simply a gathering of ordinary mortals paying a visit? I ask simply for the sake of order and so as not to remain in ignorance." This sly question made an impression. People looked at each other, every one expecting someone else to answer, and suddenly all, as though at a word of command, turned their eyes to Verhovensky and Stavrogin. "I suggest our voting on the answer to the question whether we are a meeting or not," said Madame Virginsky. "I entirely agree with the suggestion," Liputin chimed in, "though the question is rather vague." "I agree too." "And so do I," cried voices. "I too think it would make our proceedings more in order," confirmed Virginsky. "To the vote then," said his wife. "Lyamshin, please sit down to the piano. You can give your vote from there when the voting begins." "Again?" cried Lyamshin. "I've strummed enough for you." "I beg you most particularly, sit down and play. Don't you care to do anything for the cause?" "But I assure you, Arina Prohorovna, nobody is eavesdropping. It's only your fancy. Besides, the windows are high, and people would not understand if they did hear." "We don't understand ourselves," someone muttered. "But I tell you one must always be on one's guard. I mean in case there should be spies," she explained to Verhovensky. "Let them hear from the street that we have music and a name day party." "Hang it all!" Lyamshin swore, and sitting down to the piano began strumming a valse, banging on the keys almost with his fists at random. "I propose that those who want it to be a meeting should put up their right hands," Madame Virginsky proposed. Some put them up, others did not; some held them up and then put them down again, and then held them up again. "Foo! I don't understand it at all," one officer shouted. "I don't either," cried the other. "Oh, I understand," cried a third. "If it's yes, you hold your hand up." "What does yes mean?" "Means a meeting." "No, it means not a meeting." "I voted for a meeting," cried the schoolboy to Madame Virginsky. "Then why didn't you hold up your hand?" "I was looking at you. You didn't hold up yours, so I didn't hold up mine." "How stupid! I didn't hold up my hand because I proposed it. Gentlemen, now I propose the contrary. Those who want a meeting sit still and do nothing; those who don't, hold up their right hands." "Those who don't want it?" inquired the schoolboy. "Are you doing it on purpose?" cried Madame Virginsky wrathfully. "No, excuse me. Those who want it or those who don't want it. One must know that definitely," cried two or three voices. "Those who don't want it, those who don't want it." "Yes, but what is one to do? Hold up one's hand or not hold it up if one doesn't want it?" cried an officer. "Ech, we are not accustomed to constitutional methods yet," remarked the major. "Mr. Lyamshin, excuse me, but you are thumping so that no one can hear anything," observed the lame teacher. "But upon my word, Arina Prohorovna, nobody is listening, really," cried Lyamshin, jumping up. "I won't play. I've come to you as a visitor, not as a drummer." "Gentlemen," Virginsky went on, "answer verbally, are we a meeting or not?" "We are, we are!" was heard on all sides. "If so, there's no need to vote, that's enough. Are you satisfied, gentlemen? Is there any need to put it to the vote?" "No need, no need, we understand." "Perhaps someone doesn't want it to be a meeting." "No, no, we all want it." "But what does meeting mean?" cried a voice. No one answered. "We must choose a chairman," people cried from different parts of the room. "Our host, of course, our host." "Gentlemen, if so," Virginsky, the chosen chairman, began, "I propose my original motion. If anyone wants to say anything more relevant to the subject, or has some statement to make, let him bring it forward without loss of time." There was a general silence. The eyes of all were turned again on Verhovensky and Stavrogin. "Verhovensky, have you no statement to make?" Madame Virginsky asked him directly. "Nothing whatever," he answered, yawning and stretching on his chair. "But I should like a glass of brandy." "Stavrogin, don't you want to?" "Thank you, I don't drink." I mean, don't you want to speak, not don't you want brandy?" "To speak? What about? No, I don't want to." "They'll bring you some brandy," she answered Verhovensky. The girl student got up. She had darted up several times already. "I have come to make a statement about the sufferings of poor students and the means of rousing them to protest." But she broke it off. At the other end of the table a rival had risen, and all eyes turned to him. Shigalov, the man with the long ears, slowly rose from his seat with a gloomy and sullen air, and mournfully laid on the table a thick notebook filled with extremely small handwriting. He remained standing in silence. Many people looked at the notebook in consternation, but Liputin, Virginsky, and the lame teacher seemed pleased. "I ask leave to address the meeting," Shigalov pronounced sullenly but resolutely. "You have leave," Virginsky gave his sanction. The orator sat down, was silent for half a minute, and pronounced in a solemn voice: "Gentlemen!" "Here's the brandy." The sister who had been pouring out tea and had gone to fetch brandy rapped out, contemptuously and disdainfully putting the bottle before Verhovensky, together with the wine glass which she brought in her fingers without a tray or a plate. The interrupted orator made a dignified pause. "Never mind, go on, I am not listening," cried Verhovensky, pouring himself out a glass. "Gentlemen, asking your attention and, as you will see later, soliciting your aid in a matter of the first importance," Shigalov began again, "I must make some prefatory remarks." "Arina Prohorovna, haven't you some scissors?" Pyotr Stepanovitch asked suddenly. "What do you want scissors for?" she asked, with wide open eyes. "I've forgotten to cut my nails. I've been meaning to for the last 3 days," he observed, scrutinising his long and dirty nails with unruffled composure. Arina Prohorovna crimsoned, but Miss Virginsky seemed pleased. "I believe I saw them just now on the window." She got up from the table, went and found the scissors, and at once brought them. Pyotr Stepanovitch did not even look at her, took the scissors and set to work with them. Arina Prohorovna grasped that these were realistic manners, and was ashamed of her sensitiveness. People looked at one another in silence. The lame teacher looked vindictively and enviously at Verhovensky. Shigalov went on. "Dedicating my energies to the study of the social organisation, which is in the future to replace the present condition of things, I've come to the conviction that all makers of social systems, from ancient times up to the present year, 1870, have been dreamers, tellers of fairy tales, fools who contradicted themselves, who understood nothing of natural science and the strange animal called man. Plato, Rousseau, Fourier, columns of aluminium are only fit for sparrows and not for human society. But now that we are all at last preparing to act, a new form of social organisation is essential. In order to avoid further uncertainty, I propose my own system of world organisation. Here it is." He tapped the notebook. I wanted to expound my views to the meeting in the most concise form possible, but I see that I should need to add a great many verbal explanations, and so the whole exposition would occupy at least 10 evenings, one for each of my chapters. There was the sound of laughter. "I must add besides that my system is not yet complete." Laughter again. "I am perplexed by my own data, and my conclusion is a direct contradiction of the original idea with which I start. Starting from unlimited freedom, I arrive at unlimited despotism. I will add, however, that there can be no solution of the social problem but mine." The laughter grew louder and louder, but it came chiefly from the younger and less initiated visitors. There was an expression of some annoyance on the faces of Madame Virginsky, Liputin, and the lame teacher. End of Part 2, Chapter 7, Section 2a. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Part 2, Chapter 7, Section 2b, of The Possessed by Fyodor Dostoevsky, translated by Constance Garnett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Part 2, Chapter 7, A Meeting, Section 2b. "If you've been unsuccessful in making your system consistent, and have been reduced to despair yourself, what could we do with it?" one officer observed warily. "You are right, Mr. Officer," Shigalov turned sharply to him, "especially in using the word despair. Yes, I am reduced to despair. Nevertheless, nothing can take the place of the system set forth in my book, and there is no other way out of it. No one can invent anything else. And so I hasten without loss of time to invite the whole society to listen for 10 evenings to my book and then give their opinions of it. If the members are unwilling to listen to me, let us break up from the start, the men to take up service under government, the women to their cooking. For if you reject my solution you'll find no other, none whatever. If they let the opportunity slip, it will simply be their loss, for they will be bound to come back to it again." There was a stir in the company. "Is he mad or what?" voices asked. "So the whole point lies in Shigalov's despair," Lyamshin commented, "and the essential question is whether he must despair or not." "Shigalov's being on the brink of despair is a personal question," declared the schoolboy. "I propose we put it to the vote how far Shigalov's despair affects the common cause, and at the same time whether it's worth while listening to him or not," an officer suggested gaily. "That's not right." The lame teacher put in his spoke at last. As a rule he spoke with a rather mocking smile, so that it was difficult to make out whether he was in earnest or joking. "That's not right, gentlemen. Mr. Shigalov is too much devoted to his task and is also too modest. I know his book. He suggests as a final solution of the question the division of mankind into two unequal parts. 1/10 enjoys absolute liberty and unbounded power over the other 9/10. The others have to give up all individuality and become, so to speak, a herd, and through boundless submission will by a series of regenerations attain primeval innocence, something like the Garden of Eden. They'll have to work, however. The measures proposed by the author for depriving 9/10 of mankind of their freedom and transforming them into a herd through the education of whole generations are very remarkable, founded on the facts of nature, and highly logical. One may not agree with some of the deductions, but it would be difficult to doubt the intelligence and knowledge of the author. It's a pity that the time required 10 evenings is impossible to arrange for, or we might hear a great deal that's interesting." "Can you be in earnest?" Madame Virginsky addressed the lame gentleman with a shade of positive uneasiness in her voice. "When that man doesn't know what to do with people and so turns 9/10 of them into slaves? I've suspected him for a long time." "You say that of your own brother?" asked the lame man. "Relationship? Are you laughing at me?" "And besides, to work for aristocrats and to obey them as though they were gods is contemptible," observed the girl student fiercely. "What I propose is not contemptible. It's paradise, an earthly paradise, and there can be no other on earth," Shigalov pronounced authoritatively. "For my part," said Lyamshin, "if I didn't know what to do with 9/10 of mankind, I'd take them and blow them up into the air instead of putting them in paradise. I'd only leave a handful of educated people, who would live happily ever afterwards on scientific principles." "No one but a buffoon can talk like that," cried the girl, flaring up. "He is a buffoon, but he is of use," Madame Virginsky whispered to her. "And possibly that would be the best solution of the problem," said Shigalov, turning hotly to Lyamshin. "You certainly don't know what a profound thing you've succeeded in saying, my merry friend. But as it's hardly possible to carry out your idea, we must confine ourselves to an earthly paradise, since that's what they call it." "This is pretty thorough rot," broke, as though involuntarily, from Verhovensky. Without even raising his eyes, however, he went on cutting his nails with perfect nonchalance. "Why is it rot?" The lame man took it up instantly, as though he had been lying in wait for his first words, to catch at them. "Why is it rot? Mr. Shigalov is somewhat fanatical in his love for humanity, but remember that Fourier, still more Cabet and even Proudhon himself, advocated a number of the most despotic and even fantastic measures. Mr. Shigalov is perhaps far more sober in his suggestions than they are. I assure you that when one reads his book it's almost impossible not to agree with some things. He is perhaps less far from realism than any one, and his earthly paradise is almost the real one, if it ever existed, for the loss of which man is always sighing." "I knew I was in for something," Verhovensky muttered again. "Allow me," said the lame man, getting more and more excited. "Conversations and arguments about the future organisation of society are almost an actual necessity for all thinking people nowadays. Herzen was occupied with nothing else all his life. Byelinsky, as I know on very good authority, used to spend whole evenings with his friends debating and settling beforehand even the minutest, so to speak, domestic details of the social organisation of the future. "Some people go crazy over it," the major observed suddenly. "We are more likely to arrive at something by talking, anyway, than by sitting silent and posing as dictators," Liputin hissed, as though at last venturing to begin the attack. "I didn't mean Shigalov when I said it was rot," Verhovensky mumbled. "You see, gentlemen," he raised his eyes a trifle, "to my mind, all these books, Fourier, Cabet, all this talk about the right to work, and Shigalov's theories, are all like novels of which one can write 100,000, an aesthetic entertainment. I can understand that in this little town you are bored, so you rush to ink and paper." "Excuse me," said the lame man, wriggling on his chair. "Though we are provincials and of course objects of commiseration on that ground, yet we know that so far nothing has happened in the world new enough to be worth our weeping at having missed it. It is suggested to us in various pamphlets made abroad and secretly distributed that we should unite and form groups with the sole object of bringing about universal destruction. It's urged that, however much you tinker with the world, you can't make a good job of it, but that by cutting off 100 million heads and so lightening one's burden, one can jump over the ditch more safely. A fine idea, no doubt, but quite as impracticable as Shigalov's theories, which you referred to just now so contemptuously." "Well, but I haven't come here for discussion." Verhovensky let drop this significant phrase, and as though quite unaware of his blunder, drew the candle nearer to him that he might see better. "It's a pity, a great pity that you haven't come for discussion, and it's a great pity that you are so taken up just now with your toilette." "What's my toilette to you?" "To remove 100 million heads is as difficult as to transform the world by propaganda. Possibly more difficult, especially in Russia," Liputin ventured again. "It's Russia they rest their hopes on now," said an officer. "We've heard they are resting their hopes on it," interposed the lame man. "We know that a mysterious finger is pointing to our delightful country as the land most fitted to accomplish the great task. But there's this: by the gradual solution of the problem by propaganda I shall gain something anyway. I shall have some pleasant talk at least, and shall even get some recognition from government for my services to the cause of society. But in the second way, by the rapid method of cutting off 100 million heads, what benefit shall I get personally? If you began advocating that, your tongue might be cut out." "Yours certainly would be," observed Verhovensky. "You see? And as under the most favourable circumstances you would not get through such a massacre in less than 50 or at the best 30 years, for they are not sheep, you know, and perhaps they would not let themselves be slaughtered. Wouldn't it be better to pack one's bundle and migrate to some quiet island beyond calm seas, and there close one's eyes tranquilly? Believe me," he tapped the table significantly with his finger, "you will only promote emigration by such propaganda and nothing else." He finished evidently triumphant. He was one of the intellects of the province. Liputin smiled slyly, Virginsky listened rather dejectedly, the others followed the discussion with great attention, especially the ladies and officers. They all realised that the advocate of the 100 million heads theory had been driven into a corner, and waited to see what would come of it. "That was a good saying of yours, though," Verhovensky mumbled more carelessly than ever, in fact with an air of positive boredom. "Emigration is a good idea. But all the same, if in spite of all the obvious disadvantages you foresee, more and more come forward every day ready to fight for the common cause, it will be able to do without you. It's a new religion, my good friend, coming to take the place of the old one. That's why so many fighters come forward, and it's a big movement. You'd better emigrate. And you know, I should advise Dresden, not the calm islands. To begin with, it's a town that has never been visited by an epidemic, and as you are a man of culture, no doubt you are afraid of death. Another thing, it's near the Russian frontier, so you can more easily receive your income from your beloved fatherland. Thirdly, it contains what are called treasures of art, and you are a man of aesthetic tastes, formerly a teacher of literature, I believe. And, finally, it has a miniature Switzerland of its own, to provide you with poetic inspiration, for no doubt you write verse; in fact, it's a treasure in a nutshell." There was a general movement, especially among the officers. In another instant they would have all begun talking at once. But the lame man rose irritably to the bait. "No, perhaps I am not going to give up the common cause. You must understand that." "What, would you join the quintet if I proposed it to you?" Verhovensky boomed suddenly, and he laid down the scissors. Every one seemed startled. The mysterious man had revealed himself too freely. He had even spoken openly of the "quintet." "Every one feels himself to be an honest man, and will not shirk his part in the common cause." The lame man tried to wriggle out of it. "But..." "No, this is not a question which allows of a 'but,'" Verhovensky interrupted harshly and peremptorily. "I tell you, gentlemen, I must have a direct answer. I quite understand that, having come here and having called you together myself, I am bound to give you explanations." Again an unexpected revelation. "But I can give you none till I know what is your attitude to the subject. To cut the matter short, for we can't go on talking for another 30 years, as people have done for the last 30, I ask you which you prefer: the slow way, which consists in the composition of socialistic romances and the academic ordering of the destinies of humanity 1,000 years hence, while despotism will swallow the savoury morsels, which would almost fly into your mouths of themselves if you'd take a little trouble, or do you, whatever it may imply, prefer a quicker way, which will at last untie your hands and will let humanity make its own social organisation in freedom and in action, not on paper. They shout 100 million heads; that may be only a metaphor, but why be afraid of it, if, with a slow daydream on paper, despotism in the course of some 100 years will devour not 100 but 500 million heads? Take note, too, that an incurable invalid will not be cured whatever prescriptions are written for him on paper. On the contrary, if there is delay, he will grow so corrupt that he will infect us too, and contaminate all the fresh forces which one might still reckon upon now, so that we shall all at last come to grief together. I thoroughly agree that it's extremely agreeable to chatter liberally and eloquently, but action is a little trying. However, I am no hand at talking. I came here with communications, and so I beg all the honourable company not to vote, but simply and directly to state which you prefer: walking at a snail's pace in the marsh, or putting on full steam to get across it." "I am certainly for crossing at full steam," cried the schoolboy in an ecstasy. "So am I," Lyamshin chimed in. "There can be no doubt about the choice," muttered an officer, followed by another, then by someone else. What struck them all most was that Verhovensky had come "with communications," and had himself just promised to speak. "Gentlemen, I see that almost all decide for the policy of the manifestoes," he said, looking round at the company. "All, all!" cried the majority of voices. "I confess I am rather in favour of a more humane policy," said the major, "but as all are on the other side, I go with all the rest." "It appears, then, that even you are not opposed to it," said Verhovensky, addressing the lame man. "I am not exactly..." said the latter, turning rather red. "But if I do agree with the rest now, it's simply not to break up..." "You are all like that. Ready to argue for 6 months to practise your liberal eloquence, and in the end you vote the same as the rest. Gentlemen, consider though, is it true that you are all ready?" Ready for what? The question was vague, but very alluring. "All are, of course," voices were heard, but all were looking at one another. "But afterwards perhaps you will resent having agreed so quickly. That's almost always the way with you." The company was excited in various ways, greatly excited. The lame man flew at him. "Allow me to observe, however, that answers to such questions are conditional. Even if we have given our decision, you must note that questions put in such a strange way..." "In what strange way?" "In a way such questions are not asked." "Teach me how, please. But do you know, I felt sure you'd be the first to take offence." "You've extracted from us an answer as to our readiness for immediate action. But what right had you to do so? By what authority do you ask such questions?" "You should have thought of asking that question sooner. Why did you answer? You agree and then you go back on it?" "But to my mind the irresponsibility of your principal question suggests to me that you have no authority, no right, and only asked from personal curiosity." "What do you mean? What do you mean?" cried Verhovensky, apparently beginning to be much alarmed. "Why, that the initiation of new members into anything you like is done, anyway, tête à tête, and not in the company of 20 people one doesn't know," blurted out the lame man. He had said all that was in his mind because he was too irritated to restrain himself. Verhovensky turned to the general company with a capitally simulated look of alarm. "Gentlemen, I deem it my duty to declare that all this is folly, and that our conversation has gone too far. I have so far initiated no one, and no one has the right to say of me that I initiate members. We were simply discussing our opinions. That's so, isn't it? But whether that's so or not, you alarm me very much." He turned to the lame man again. "I had no idea that it was unsafe here to speak of such practically innocent matters except tête à tête. Are you afraid of informers? Can there possibly be an informer among us here?" The excitement became tremendous. All began talking. "Gentlemen, if that is so," Verhovensky went on, "I have compromised myself more than anyone. And so I will ask you to answer one question, if you care to, of course, you are all perfectly free." "What question? What question?" every one clamoured. "A question that will make it clear whether we are to remain together or take up our hats and go our several ways without speaking." "The question, the question." If any one of us knew of a proposed political murder, would he, in view of all the consequences, go to give information, or would he stay at home and await events? Opinions may differ on this point. The answer to the question will tell us clearly whether we are to separate or to remain together and for far longer than this one evening. Let me appeal to you first." He turned to the lame man. "Why to me first?" "Because you began it all. Be so good as not to prevaricate. It won't help you to be cunning. But please yourself, it's for you to decide." "Excuse me, but such a question is positively insulting." "No? Can't you be more exact than that?" "I've never been an agent of the secret police," replied the latter, wriggling more than ever. "Be so good as to be more definite. Don't keep us waiting." The lame man was so furious that he left off answering. Without a word he glared wrathfully from under his spectacles at his tormentor. "Yes or no? Would you inform or not?" cried Verhovensky. "Of course I wouldn't," the lame man shouted twice as loudly. "And no one would, of course," cried many voices. "Allow me to appeal to you, Mr. Major. Would you inform or not?" Verhovensky went on. "And note that I appeal to you on purpose." "I won't inform." "But you knew that someone meant to rob and murder someone else, an ordinary mortal, then you would inform and give warning?" "Yes, of course. But that's a private affair, while the other would be a political treachery. I've never been an agent of the secret police." "And no one here has," voices cried again. "It's an unnecessary question. Every one will make the same answer. There are no informers here." "What is that gentleman getting up for?" cried the girl student. "That's Shatov. What are you getting up for?" cried the lady of the house. Shatov did, in fact, stand up. He was holding his cap in his hand and looking at Verhovensky. Apparently he wanted to say something to him, but was hesitating. His face was pale and wrathful, but he controlled himself. He did not say one word, but in silence walked towards the door. "Shatov, this won't make things better for you," Verhovensky called after him enigmatically. "But it will for you, since you are a spy and a scoundrel," Shatov shouted to him from the door, and he went out. Shouts and exclamations again. "That's what comes of a test," cried a voice. "It's been of use," cried another. "Hasn't it been of use too late?" observed a third. "Who invited him? Who let him in? Who is he? Who is Shatov? Will he inform or won't he?" There was a shower of questions. "If he were an informer he would have kept up appearances instead of cursing it all and going away," observed someone. "See, Stavrogin is getting up too. Stavrogin has not answered the question either," cried the girl student. Stavrogin did actually stand up, and at the other end of the table Kirillov rose at the same time. "Excuse me, Mr. Stavrogin," Madame Virginsky addressed him sharply. "We all answered the question, while you are going away without a word." "I see no necessity to answer the question which interests you," muttered Stavrogin. "But we've compromised ourselves and you won't," shouted several voices. "What business is it of mine if you have compromised yourselves?" laughed Stavrogin, but his eyes flashed. "What business? What business?" voices exclaimed. Many people got up from their chairs. "Allow me, gentlemen, allow me," cried the lame man. "Mr. Verhovensky hasn't answered the question either. He has only asked it." The remark produced a striking effect. All looked at one another. Stavrogin laughed aloud in the lame man's face and went out. Kirillov followed him. Verhovensky ran after them into the passage. "What are you doing?" he faltered, seizing Stavrogin's hand and gripping it with all his might in his. Stavrogin pulled away his hand without a word. "Be at Kirillov's directly, I'll come. It's absolutely necessary for me to see you." "It isn't necessary for me," Stavrogin cut him short. "Stavrogin will be there," Kirillov said finally. "Stavrogin, it is necessary for you. I will show you that there." They went out. Chapter 8. Of the Possessed by Fyodor Dostoevsky, translated by Constance Garnett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Part 2, Chapter 8. Ivan the Tsarevitch. They had gone. Pyotr Stepanovitch was about to rush back to the meeting to bring order into chaos, but probably reflecting that it wasn't worth bothering about, left everything, and 2 minutes later was flying after the other two. On the way he remembered a short cut to Filipov's house. He rushed along it, up to his knees in mud, and did in fact arrive at the very moment when Stavrogin and Kirillov were coming in at the gate. "You here already?" observed Kirillov. "That's good. Come in." "How is it you told us you lived alone?" asked Stavrogin, passing a boiling samovar in the passage. "You will see directly who it is I live with," muttered Kirillov. "Go in." They had hardly entered when Verhovensky at once took out of his pocket the anonymous letter he had taken from Lembke and laid it before Stavrogin. They all then sat down. Stavrogin read the letter in silence. "Well?" he asked. "That scoundrel will do as he writes," Verhovensky explained. "So, as he is under your control, tell me how to act. I assure you he may go to Lembke to morrow." "Well, let him go." "Let him go? And when we can prevent him too?" "You are mistaken. He is not dependent on me. Besides, I don't care. He doesn't threaten me in any way, he only threatens you." "You too." "I don't think so." "But there are other people who may not spare you." "Surely you understand that. Listen, Stavrogin, this is only playing with words. Surely you don't grudge the money?" "Why, would it cost money?" "It certainly would. 2,000 or at least 1,500. Give it to me to morrow, or even to day, and to morrow evening I'll send him to Petersburg for you. That's just what he wants. If you like, he can take Marya Timofyevna. Note that." There was something distracted about him. He spoke as it were without caution, and he did not reflect on his words. Stavrogin watched him, wondering. "I've no reason to send Marya Timofyevna away." "Perhaps you don't even want to." Pyotr Stepanovitch smiled ironically. "Perhaps I don't." "In short, will there be the money or not?" he cried with angry impatience, and, as it were peremptorily, to Stavrogin. The latter scrutinised him gravely. "There won't be the money." "Look here, Stavrogin, you know something, or have done something already. You are going it." His face worked, the corners of his mouth twitched, and he suddenly laughed an unprovoked and irrelevant laugh. "But you've had money from your father for the estate," Stavrogin observed calmly. "Maman sent you 6 or 8,000 for Stepan Trofimovitch. So you can pay the 1,500 out of your own money. I don't care to pay for other people. I've given a lot as it is. It annoys me." He smiled himself at his own words. "Ah, you are beginning to joke." Stavrogin got up from his chair. Verhovensky instantly jumped up too, and mechanically stood with his back to the door as though barring the way to him. Stavrogin had already made a motion to push him aside and go out, when he stopped short. "I won't give up Shatov to you," he said. Pyotr Stepanovitch started. They looked at one another. "I told you this evening why you needed Shatov's blood," said Stavrogin, with flashing eyes. "It's the cement you want to bind your groups together with. You drove Shatov away cleverly just now. You knew very well that he wouldn't promise not to inform, and he would have thought it mean to lie to you. But what do you want with me? What do you want with me? Ever since we met abroad you won't let me alone. The explanation you've given me so far was simply raving. Meanwhile, you are driving at my giving Lebyadkin 1,500 roubles so as to give Fedka an opportunity to murder him. I know that you think I want my wife murdered too. You think to tie my hands by this crime and have me in your power. That's it, isn't it? What good will that be to you? What the devil do you want with me? Look at me. Once for all, am I the man for you? And let me alone." "Has Fedka been to you himself?" Verhovensky asked breathlessly. "Yes, he came. His price is 1,500 too, but here, he'll repeat it himself, there he stands." Stavrogin stretched out his hand. Pyotr Stepanovitch turned round quickly. A new figure, Fedka, wearing a sheepskin coat but without a cap, as though he were at home, stepped out of the darkness in the doorway. He stood there laughing and showing his even white teeth. His black eyes, with yellow whites, darted cautiously about the room watching the gentleman. There was something he did not understand. He had evidently been just brought in by Kirillov, and his inquiring eyes turned to the latter. He stood in the doorway, but was unwilling to come into the room. "I suppose you got him ready here to listen to our bargaining, or that he may actually see the money in our hands. Is that it?" asked Stavrogin, and without waiting for an answer he walked out of the house. Verhovensky, almost frantic, overtook him at the gate. "Stop, not another step!" he cried, seizing him by the arm. Stavrogin tried to pull away his arm, but did not succeed. He was overcome with fury. Seizing Verhovensky by the hair with his left hand, he flung him with all his might on the ground, and went out at the gate. But he had not gone 30 paces before Verhovensky overtook him again. "Let us make it up, let us make it up," he murmured in a spasmodic whisper. Stavrogin shrugged his shoulders, but neither answered nor turned round. "I will bring you Lizaveta Nikolaevna to morrow, shall I? No? Why don't you answer? Tell me what you want. I'll do it. Listen. I'll let you have Shatov, shall I?" "Then it's true that you meant to kill him," cried Stavrogin. "What do you want with Shatov? What is he to you?" Pyotr Stepanovitch went on, gasping, speaking rapidly. He was in a frenzy, and kept running forward and seizing Stavrogin by the elbow, probably unaware of what he was doing. "Listen, I'll let you have him. Let's make it up. Your price is a very great one, but let's make it up." Stavrogin glanced at him at last and was amazed. The eyes, the voice were not the same as always, or as they had been in the room just now. What he saw was almost another face. The intonation of the voice was different. Verhovensky besought, implored. He was a man from whom what was most precious was being taken, or had been taken, and who was still stunned by the shock. "But what's the matter with you?" cried Stavrogin. The other did not answer, but ran after him and gazed at him with the same imploring but yet inflexible expression. "Let's make it up," he whispered once more. "Listen. Like Fedka, I have a knife in my boot, but I'll make it up with you." "But what do you want with me, damn you?" Stavrogin cried with intense anger and amazement. "Is there some mystery about it? Am I a sort of talisman for you?" "Listen. We are going to make a revolution," the other muttered rapidly and almost in delirium. "You don't believe we shall make a revolution? We are going to make such an upheaval that everything will be uprooted from its foundation. Karmazinov is right that there is nothing to lay hold of. Karmazinov is very intelligent. Another 10 such groups in different parts of Russia, and I am safe." "Groups of fools like that?" broke reluctantly from Stavrogin. "Oh, don't be so clever, Stavrogin. Don't be so clever yourself. And you know you are by no means so intelligent that you need wish others to be. You are afraid, you have no faith, you are frightened at our doing things on such a scale. And why are they fools? They are not such fools. No one has a mind of his own nowadays. There are terribly few original minds nowadays. Virginsky is a pure-hearted man, 10 times as pure as you or I. But never mind about him. Liputin is a rogue, but I know one point about him. Every rogue has some point in him. Lyamshin is the only one who hasn't, but he is in my hands. A few more groups, and I should have money and passports everywhere, so much at least. Suppose it were only that. And safe places, so that they can search as they like. They might uproot one group, but they'd stick at the next. We'll set things in a ferment. Surely you don't think that we two are not enough? Take Shigalov and let me alone."
Shigalov is a man of genius. Do you know he is a genius like Fourier, but bolder than Fourier, stronger. I'll look after him. He's discovered equality." "He is in a fever. He is raving. Something very queer has happened to him," thought Stavrogin, looking at him once more. Both walked on without stopping. "He's written a good thing in that manuscript," Verhovensky went on. "He suggests a system of spying. Every member of the society spies on the others, and it's his duty to inform against them. Every one belongs to all, and all to every one. All are slaves and equal in their slavery. In extreme cases he advocates slander and murder, but the great thing about it is equality. To begin with, the level of education, science, and talents is lowered. A high level of education and science is only possible for great intellects, and they are not wanted. The great intellects have always seized the power and been despots. Great intellects cannot help being despots, and they've always done more harm than good. They will be banished or put to death. Cicero will have his tongue cut out, Copernicus will have his eyes put out, Shakespeare will be stoned. That's Shigalovism. Slaves are bound to be equal. There has never been either freedom or equality without despotism, but in the herd there is bound to be equality, and that's Shigalovism. Ha ha ha! Do you think it's strange? I am for Shigalovism." Stavrogin tried to quicken his pace, and to reach home as soon as possible. "If this fellow is drunk, where did he manage to get drunk?" crossed his mind. "Can it be the brandy?" "Listen, Stavrogin. To level the mountains is a fine idea, not an absurd one. I am for Shigalov. Down with culture. We've had enough science. Without science we have material enough to go on for 1,000 years, but one must have discipline. The one thing wanting in the world is discipline. The thirst for culture is an aristocratic thirst. The moment you have family ties or love, you get the desire for property. We will destroy that desire. We'll make use of drunkenness, slander, spying. We'll make use of incredible corruption. We'll stifle every genius in its infancy. We'll reduce all to a common denominator, complete equality. We've learned a trade and we are honest men. We need nothing more. That was an answer given by English workingmen recently. Only the necessary is necessary. That's a motto of the whole world henceforward. But it needs a shock. That's for us, the directors, to look after. Slaves must have directors. Absolute submission, absolute loss of individuality, but once in 30 years Shigalov would let them have a shock, and they would all suddenly begin eating one another up to a certain point, simply as a precaution against boredom. Boredom is an aristocratic sensation. The Shigalovians will have no desires. Desire and suffering are our lot, but Shigalovism is for the slaves. "You exclude yourself?" Stavrogin broke in again. "You too. Do you know, I have thought of giving up the world to the Pope. Let him come forth, on foot and barefoot, and show himself to the rabble, saying, 'See what they have brought me to!' And they will all rush after him, even the troops. The Pope at the head, with us round him, and below us Shigalovism. All that's needed is that the International should come to an agreement with the Pope. So it will. And the old chap will agree at once. There's nothing else he can do. Remember my words. Aha! Is it stupid? Tell me, is it stupid or not?" "That's enough," Stavrogin muttered with vexation. "Enough? Listen. I've given up the Pope. Damn Shigalovism. Damn the Pope. We must have something more every day. Not Shigalovism, for Shigalovism is a rare specimen of the jeweller's art. It's an ideal, it's in the future. Shigalov is an artist and a fool like every philanthropist. We need coarse work, and Shigalov despises coarse work. Listen. The Pope shall be for the West, and you shall be for us. You shall be for us." "Let me alone, you drunken fellow," muttered Stavrogin, and he quickened his pace. "Stavrogin, you are beautiful!" cried Pyotr Stepanovitch, almost ecstatically. "Do you know that you are beautiful? What's the most precious thing about you is that you sometimes don't know it. Oh, I've studied you. I often watch you on the sly. There's a lot of simple heartedness and naïveté about you still. Do you know that? There still is. There is. You must be suffering, and suffering genuinely from that simple heartedness. I love beauty. I am a nihilist, but I love beauty. Are nihilists incapable of loving beauty? It's only idols they dislike, but I love an idol. You are my idol. You injure no one and every one hates you. You treat every one as an equal, and yet every one is afraid of you. That's good. Nobody would slap you on the shoulder. You are an awful aristocrat. An aristocrat is irresistible when he goes in for democracy. To sacrifice life, your own or another's, is nothing to you. You are just the man that's needed. It's just such a man as you that I need. I know no one but you. You are the leader. You are the sun and I am your worm." He suddenly kissed his hand. A shiver ran down Stavrogin's spine and he pulled away his hand in dismay. They stood still. "Madman!" whispered Stavrogin. "Perhaps I am raving, perhaps I am raving," Pyotr Stepanovitch assented, speaking rapidly. "But I've thought of the first step. Shigalov would never have thought of it. There are lots of Shigalovs, but only one man. One man in Russia has hit on the first step and knows how to take it. And I am that man. Why do you look at me? I need you. You. Without you I am nothing. Without you I am a fly, a bottled idea, Columbus without America." Stavrogin stood still and looked intently into his wild eyes. "Listen. First of all we'll make an upheaval," Verhovensky went on in desperate haste, continually clutching at Stavrogin's left sleeve. "I've already told you. We shall penetrate to the peasantry. Do you know that we are tremendously powerful already? Our party does not consist only of those who commit murder and arson, fire off pistols in the traditional fashion, or bite colonels. They are only a hindrance. I don't accept anything without discipline. I am a scoundrel, of course, and not a socialist. Aha! Listen! I've reckoned them all up. A teacher who laughs with children at their God and at their cradle is on our side. The lawyer who defends an educated murderer because he is more cultured than his victims and could not help murdering them to get money is one of us. The schoolboys who murder a peasant for the sake of sensation are ours. The juries who acquit every criminal are ours. The prosecutor who trembles at a trial for fear he should not seem advanced enough is ours. Among officials and literary men we have lots, and they don't know it themselves. On the other hand, the docility of schoolboys and fools has reached an extreme pitch. The schoolmasters are bitter and bilious. On all sides we see vanity puffed up out of all proportion, brutal, monstrous appetites. Do you know how many we shall catch by little ready-made ideas? When I left Russia, Littre's dictum that crime is insanity was all the rage. I come back and I find that crime is no longer insanity, but simply common sense, almost a duty. Anyway, a gallant protest. How can we expect a cultured man not to commit a murder if he is in need of money? But these are only the first fruits. The Russian god has already been vanquished by cheap vodka. The peasants are drunk, the mothers are drunk, the children are drunk, the churches are empty, and in the peasant courts one hears 100 lashes or stand us a bucket of vodka. Oh, this generation has only to grow up. It's only a pity we can't afford to wait, or we might have let them get a bit more tipsy. Ah, what a pity there's no proletariat! But there will be, there will be. We are going that way." "It's a pity, too, that we've grown greater fools," muttered Stavrogin, moving forward as before. "Listen. I've seen a child of 6 years old leading home his drunken mother whilst she swore at him with foul words. Do you suppose I am glad of that? When it's in our hands, maybe we'll mend things. If need be, we'll drive them for 40 years into the wilderness. But 1 or 2 generations of vice are essential now, monstrous, abject vice by which a man is transformed into a loathsome, cruel, egoistic reptile. That's what we need. And what's more, a little fresh blood that we may get accustomed to it. Why are you laughing? I am not contradicting myself. I am only contradicting the philanthropists and Shigalovism, not myself. I am a scoundrel, not a socialist. Ha ha! I'm only sorry there's no time. I promised Karmazinov to begin in May and to make an end by October. Is that too soon? Aha! Do you know what, Stavrogin? Though the Russian people use foul language, there's nothing cynical about them so far. Do you know the serfs had more self-respect than Karmazinov? Though they were beaten, they always preserved their gods, which is more than Karmazinov's done." "Well, Verhovensky, this is the first time I've heard you talk, and I listen with amazement," observed Stavrogin. "So you are really not a socialist then, but Some sort of ambitious politician?" "A scoundrel, a scoundrel. You are wondering what I am. I'll tell you what I am directly. That's what I'm leading up to. It was not for nothing that I kissed your hand. But the people must believe that we know what we are after, while the other side do nothing but brandish their cudgels and beat their own followers. Ah, if we only had more time! That's the only trouble, we have no time. We will proclaim destruction. Why is it that idea has such a fascination? But we must have a little exercise, we must. We'll set fires going. We'll set legends going. Every scurvy group will be of use. Out of those very groups I'll pick you out fellows so keen they'll not shrink from shooting, and be grateful for the honour of a job, too. Well, and there will be an upheaval. There's going to be such an upset as the world has never seen before. Russia will be overwhelmed with darkness, the earth will weep for its old gods. Well, then we shall bring forward whom?" "Whom?" "Ivan the Tsarevitch." "Whom?" "Ivan the Tsarevitch. You." Stavrogin thought a minute. "A pretender?" he asked suddenly, looking with intense surprise at his frantic companion. "Ah! So that's your plan at last?" "We shall say that he is in hiding," Verhovensky said softly, in a sort of tender whisper, as though he really were drunk indeed. "Do you know the magic of that phrase, 'he is in hiding'? But he will appear, he will appear! We'll set a legend going better than the Skoptsis. He exists, but no one has seen him. Oh, what a legend one can set going! And the great thing is that it will be a new force at work. And we need that, that's what they are crying for. What can Socialism do? It's destroyed the old forces, but hasn't brought in any new. But in this we have a force, and what a force! Incredible! We only need one lever to lift up the earth. Everything will rise up." "Then have you been seriously reckoning on me?" Stavrogin said with a malicious smile. "Why do you laugh, and so spitefully? Don't frighten me. I am like a little child now. I can be frightened to death by one smile like that. Listen. I'll let no one see you, no one. So it must be. He exists, but no one has seen him, he is in hiding. And do you know, one might show you to 1 out of 100,000, for instance, and the rumour will spread over all the land, 'We've seen him, we've seen him.' Ivan Filipovitch, the god of Sabaoth, has been seen too, when he ascended into heaven in his chariot in the sight of men. They saw him with their own eyes. And you are not an Ivan Filipovitch. You are beautiful and proud as a god. You are seeking nothing for yourself, with the halo of a victim round you, in hiding. The great thing is the legend. You'll conquer them. You'll have only to look and you will conquer them. He is in hiding and will come forth bringing a new truth. And meanwhile we'll pass 2 or 3 judgments as wise as Solomon's. The groups, you know, the quintets. We've no need of newspapers. If out of 10,000 petitions only one is granted, all would come with petitions. In every parish every peasant will know that there is somewhere a hollow tree where petitions are to be put. And the whole land will resound with the cry, 'A new just law is to come,' and the sea will be troubled, and the whole gimcrack show will fall to the ground, and then we shall consider how to build up an edifice of stone. For the first time. We are going to build it, we, and only we." "Madness," said Stavrogin. "Why? Why don't you want it? Are you afraid? That's why I caught at you, because you are afraid of nothing. Is it unreasonable? But you see, so far I am Columbus without America. Would Columbus without America seem reasonable?" Stavrogin did not speak. Meanwhile they had reached the house and stopped at the entrance. "Listen," Verhovensky bent down to his ear. "I'll do it for you without the money. I'll settle Marya Timofyevna to morrow, without the money, and to morrow I'll bring you Liza. Will you have Liza to morrow?" "Is he really mad?" Stavrogin wondered, smiling. The front door was opened. "Stavrogin, is America ours?" said Verhovensky, seizing his hand for the last time. "What for?" said Nikolay Vsyevolodovitch gravely and sternly. "You don't care, I knew that!" cried Verhovensky in an access of furious anger. "You are lying, you miserable, profligate, perverted little aristocrat. I don't believe you, you've the appetite of a wolf. Understand that you've cost me such a price I can't give you up now. There's no one on earth but you. I invented you abroad, I invented it all, looking at you. If I hadn't watched you from my corner, nothing of all this would have entered my head." Stavrogin went up the steps without answering. "Stavrogin!" Verhovensky called after him. "I give you a day, 2 then, 3 then, more than 3 I can't, and then you're to answer." End of Chapter 8. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine.
Part Two, Chapter 9 of The Possessed by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Constance Garnett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Part Two, Chapter 9. A Raid at Stepan Trofimovitch's. Meanwhile an incident had occurred which astounded me and shattered Stepan Trofimovitch. At 8 o'clock in the morning Nastasya ran round to me from him with the news that her master was "raided." At first I could not make out what she meant. I could only gather that the raid was carried out by officials, that they had come and taken his papers, and that a soldier had tied them up in a bundle and wheeled them away in a barrow. It was a fantastic story. I hurried at once to Stepan Trofimovitch. I found him in a surprising condition, upset and in great agitation, but at the same time unmistakably triumphant. On the table in the middle of the room the samovar was boiling, and there was a glass of tea poured out but untouched and forgotten. Stepan Trofimovitch was wandering round the table and peeping into every corner of the room, unconscious of what he was doing. He was wearing his usual red knitted jacket, but seeing me he hurriedly put on his coat and waistcoat, a thing he had never done before when any of his intimate friends found him in his jacket. He took me warmly by the hand at once. "Enfin un ami," he heaved a deep sigh. "Cher, I've sent to you only, and no one knows anything. We must give Nastasya orders to lock the doors and not admit anyone except, of course, them. Vous comprenez?" He looked at me uneasily, as though expecting a reply. I made haste, of course, to question him, and from his disconnected and broken sentences, full of unnecessary parentheses, I succeeded in learning that at 7 o'clock that morning an official of the province had all of a sudden called on him. Pardon, j'ai oublié son nom. Il n'est pas dupe, but I think he came to the town with Lembke. Quelque chose de bête et d'alarmant dans la physionomie. Il s'appelle Rosenthal. Wasn't it Blum? Yes, that was his name. Vous le connaissez? Quelque chose de bête et de très content dans la figure. Pourtant très sévère, roide et sérieux. A type of the police, of the submissive subordinates. Je m'y connais. I was still asleep, and would you believe it? He asked to have a look at my books and manuscripts. Oui, je m'en souviens. Il a employé ces mots. He did not arrest me, but only the books. Il se tenait à distance, and when he began to explain his visit, it looked as though enfin il avait l'air de croire que je tomberais sur lui immédiatement et que je commencerais à le battre comme plâtre. Tous ces gens du bas étage sont comme ça when they have to do with the gentlemen. I need hardly say I understood it all at once. Voilà 20 ans que je m'y prépare. I opened all the drawers and handed him all the keys. I gave them myself, I gave him all. Je te digne calme. From the books he took the foreign edition of Herzen, the bound volume of The Bell, 4 copies of my poem. Et enfin tout ça, then he took my letters and my papers, et quelques-unes de mes ébauches historiques, critiques et politiques. All that they carried off. Nastasya says that a soldier wheeled them away in a barrow and covered them with an apron. Oui, c'est cela, with an apron. It sounded like delirium. Who could make head or tail of it? I pelted him with questions again. Had Blum come alone or with others? On whose authority? By what right? How had he dared? How did he explain it? Il était so, bien so, but there was someone else dans l'antichambre. Oui, je m'en souviens, et puis, though I believe there was someone else besides, and there was a guard standing in the entry. You must ask Nastasya, she knows all about it better than I do.
J'étais surexcité. Voyez-vous, il parlait un tas de choses. He said very little, though. It was I said all that. I told him the story of my life, simply from that point of view, of course. J'étais surexcité, mesdames, je vous assure. I'm afraid, though, I may have shed tears. They got the barrow from the shop next door." "Oh, heavens! How could all this have happened? But for mercy's sake, speak more exactly, Stepan Trofimovitch. What you tell me sounds like a dream." "Cher, I feel as though I were in a dream myself. Savez-vous, il a prononcé le nom de Telyatnikov, and I believe that that man was concealed in the entry. Yes, I remember. He suggested calling the prosecutor and Dmitri Dmitritch, I believe. Qui me doit encore 15 roubles I won at cards. Soit dit en passant. Enfin, je n'ai pas trop compris, but I got the better of them, and what do I care for Dmitri Dmitritch? I believe I begged him very earnestly to keep it quiet. I begged him particularly, most particularly. I am afraid I demeaned myself, in fact. Comment croyez-vous? Enfin, il a consenti. Yes, I remember, he suggested that himself, that it would be better to keep it quiet, for he had only come to have a look round, et rien de plus, and nothing more, nothing more, and that if they find nothing, nothing will happen. So that we ended it all en amis, je suis tout à fait content. Why, then he suggested the usual course of proceedings in such cases, and regular guarantees, and you rejected them yourself," I cried with friendly indignation. "Yes, it's better without the guarantees. And why make a scandal? Let's keep it en amis so long as we can. You know, in our town, if they get to know it, mes amis, et puis à quoi bon le procureur, ce cochon de notre procureur, qui deux fois m'a manqué de politesse et qu'on a rossé à plaisir l'autre année chez cette charmante et belle Natalia Pavlovna quand il se cacha dans son boudoir. Et puis, mon ami, don't make objections and don't depress me, I beg you, for nothing is more unbearable when a man is in trouble than for 100 friends to point out to him what a fool he has made of himself. Sit down, though, and have some tea. I must admit I am awfully tired. Hadn't I better lie down and put vinegar on my head? What do you think?" "Certainly," I cried. "Ice even. You are very much upset, you are pale and your hands are trembling. Lie down, rest, and put off telling me. I'll sit by you and wait." He hesitated, but I insisted on his lying down. Nastasya brought a cup of vinegar. I wetted a towel and laid it on his head. Then Nastasya stood on a chair and began lighting a lamp before the ikon in the corner. I noticed this with surprise. There had never been a lamp there before, and now suddenly it had made its appearance. "I arranged for that as soon as they had gone away," muttered Stepan Trofimovitch, looking at me slyly. "Quand on a de ces choses-là dans sa chambre, et qu'on vient vous arrêter, it makes an impression, and they are sure to report that they have seen it." When she had done the lamp, Nastasya stood in the doorway, leaned her cheek in her right hand, and began gazing at him with a lachrymose air. "Éloignez là on some excuse," he nodded to me from the sofa. "I can't endure this Russian sympathy, et puis ça m'embête." But she went away of herself. I noticed that he kept looking towards the door and listening for sounds in the passage. "Il faut être prêt, voyez-vous," he said, looking at me significantly. "Chaque moment they may come and take one, and phew! A man disappears." "Heavens! Who'll come? Who will take you? Voyez-vous, mon cher, I asked straight out when he was going away, what would they do to me now?" "You'd better have asked them where you'd be exiled," I cried out in the same indignation. "That's just what I meant when I asked, but he went away without answering. Voyez vous, as for linen, clothes, warm things especially, that must be as they decide. If they tell me to take them, all right, or they might send me in a soldier's overcoat. But I thrust 35 roubles" he suddenly dropped his voice, looking towards the door by which Nastasya had gone out "in a slit in my waistcoat pocket. Here, feel. I believe they won't take the waistcoat off, and left 7 roubles in my purse to keep up appearances, as though that were all I have. You see it's in small change, and the coppers are on the table, so they won't guess that I've hidden the money, but will suppose that that's all. For God knows where I may have to sleep to night." I bowed my head before such madness.
It was obvious that a man could not be arrested and searched in the way he was describing, and he must have mixed things up. It's true it all happened in the days before our present, more recent regulations. It's true, too, that according to his own account, they had offered to follow the more regular procedure, but he got the better of them and refused. Of course, not long ago a governor might, in extreme cases... But how could this be an extreme case? That's what baffled me. "No doubt they had a telegram from Petersburg," Stepan Trofimovitch said suddenly. "A telegram? About you? Because of the works of Herzen and your poem? Have you taken leave of your senses? What is there in that to arrest you for?" I was positively angry. He made a grimace and was evidently mortified, not at my exclamation, but at the idea that there was no ground for arrest. "Who can tell in our day what he may not be arrested for?" he muttered enigmatically. A wild and nonsensical idea crossed my mind. "Stepan Trofimovitch, tell me as a friend," I cried. "As a real friend, I will not betray you. Do you belong to some secret society or not?" And on this, to my amazement, he was not quite certain whether he was or was not a member of some secret society. "That depends, voyez vous." "How do you mean it depends?" "When with one's whole heart one is an adherent of progress and... who can answer it? You may suppose you don't belong, and suddenly it turns out that you do belong to something." "Now is that possible? It's a case of yes or no." "C'est la dame de Petersburg, when she and I were meaning to found a magazine there. That's what's at the root of it. She gave them the slip then, and they forgot us, but now they've remembered. Cher, cher, don't you know me?" he cried hysterically. "And they'll take us, put us in a cart, and march us off to Siberia for ever, or forget us in prison." And he suddenly broke into bitter weeping. His tears positively streamed. He covered his face with his red silk handkerchief and sobbed convulsively for 5 minutes. It wrung my heart. This was the man who had been a prophet among us for 20 years, a leader, a patriarch, the Kukolnik who had borne himself so loftily and majestically before all of us, before whom we bowed down with genuine reverence, feeling proud of doing so, and all of a sudden here he was sobbing like a naughty child, waiting for the rod which the teacher is fetching for him. I felt fearfully sorry for him. He believed in the reality of that cart as he believed that I was sitting by his side, and he expected it that morning, at once, that very minute, and all this on account of his Herzen and some poem. Such complete, absolute ignorance of everyday reality was touching, and somehow repulsive. At last he left off crying, got up from the sofa and began walking about the room again, continuing to talk to me, though he looked out of the window every minute and listened to every sound in the passage. Our conversation was still disconnected. All my assurances and attempts to console him rebounded from him like peas from a wall. He scarcely listened, but yet what he needed was that I should console him and keep on talking with that object. I saw that he could not do without me now, and would not let me go for anything. I remained, and we spent more than 2 hours together. In conversation he recalled that Blum had taken with him 2 manifestoes he had found. "Manifestoes?" I said, foolishly frightened. "Do you mean to say you..." "Oh, 10 were left here," he answered, with vexation. He talked to me at one moment in a vexed and haughty tone, and at the next with dreadful plaintiveness and humiliation. "But I had disposed of 8 already, and Blum only found 2." And he suddenly flushed with indignation. "Vous me mettez avec ces gens là. Do you suppose I could be working with those scoundrels, those anonymous libellers, with my son Pyotr Stepanovitch, avec ses esprits forts de lâcheté? Oh, heavens!" "Bah! Haven't they mixed you up, perhaps? But it's nonsense, it can't be so," I observed. "Savez vous," broke from him suddenly, "I feel at moments que je ferai là-bas quelques esclandres. Oh, don't go away, don't leave me alone. Ma carrière est finie aujourd'hui, je le sens. Do you know, I might fall on somebody there and bite him, like that lieutenant." He looked at me with a strange expression, alarmed, and at the same time anxious to alarm me. He certainly was getting more and more exasperated with somebody and about something as time went on and the police cart did not appear. He was positively wrathful. Suddenly Nastasya, who had come from the kitchen into the passage for some reason, upset a clothes horse there. Stepan Trofimovitch trembled and turned numb with terror as he sat, but when the noise was explained he almost shrieked at Nastasya, and stamping drove her back to the kitchen. A minute later he said, looking at me in despair: "I am ruined. Cher," he sat down suddenly beside me and looked piteously into my face. "Cher, it's not Siberia I am afraid of, I swear. Oh, je vous jure!" Tears positively stood in his eyes. "It's something else I fear." I saw from his expression that he wanted at last to tell me something of great importance, which he had till now refrained from telling. "I am afraid of disgrace," he whispered mysteriously. "What disgrace? On the contrary, believe me, Stepan Trofimovitch, that all this will be explained to day, and will end to your advantage." "Are you so sure that they will pardon me?" "Pardon you? What? What a word! What have you done? I assure you you've done nothing." "Qu'en savez-vous? All my life has been... cher... They'll remember everything, and if they find nothing it will be worse still," he added all of a sudden, unexpectedly. "How do you mean it will be worse?" "It will be worse. You don't understand. My friend, let it be Siberia, archangel, loss of rights. If I must perish, let me perish, but I am afraid of something else." Again whispering, a scared face, mystery. "But of what? Of what?" "They'll flog me," he pronounced, looking at me with a face of despair. "Who'll flog you? What for? Where?" I cried, feeling alarmed that he was going out of his mind. "Where? Why there, where that's done." "But where is it done?" "Eh, cher," he whispered almost in my ear. "The floor suddenly gives way under you, you drop half through, every one knows that." "Legends!" I cried, guessing what he meant. "Old tales, can you have believed them till now?" I laughed. "Tales, but there must be foundation for them. Flogged men tell no tales. I've imagined it 10,000 times." "But you, why you? You've done nothing, you know." "That makes it worse. They'll find out I've done nothing and flog me for it." "And are you sure that you'll be taken to Petersburg for that?" "My friend, I've told you already that I regret nothing. Ma carrière est finie. From that hour when she said good bye to me at Skvoreshniki my life has had no value for me. But disgrace, disgrace. Que dira-t-elle if she finds out?" He looked at me in despair, and the poor fellow flushed all over. I dropped my eyes too. "She'll find out nothing, for nothing will happen to you. I feel as if I were speaking to you for the first time in my life, Stepan Trofimovitch. You've astonished me so this morning." "But, my friend, this isn't fear. For even if I am pardoned, even if I am brought here and nothing is done to me, then I am undone. Elle me soupçonnera toute sa vie. Me, the poet, the thinker, the one whom she has worshipped for 22 years." "It will never enter her head." "It will," he whispered with profound conviction. "We've talked of it several times in Petersburg, in Lent, before we came away, when we were both afraid. Elle me soupçonnera toute sa vie, and how can I disabuse her? It won't sound likely. And in this wretched town, who'd believe it? C'est invraisemblable. Et puis les femmes! She will be pleased, she will be genuinely grieved like a true friend, but secretly she will be pleased. I shall give her a weapon against me for the rest of my life. Oh, it's all over with me. 20 years of such perfect happiness with her, and now..." He hid his face in his hands. "Stepan Trofimovitch, oughtn't you to let Varvara Petrovna know at once of what has happened?" I suggested. "God preserve me!" he cried, shuddering and leaping up from his place. "On no account, never, after what was said at parting at Skvoreshniki, never!" His eyes flashed. We went on sitting together another hour or more, I believe, expecting something all the time. The idea had taken such hold of us. He lay down again, even closed his eyes, and lay for 20 minutes without uttering a word, so that I thought he was asleep or unconscious. Suddenly he got up impulsively, pulled the towel off his head, jumped up from the sofa, rushed to the looking glass, with trembling eyes tied his cravat, and in a voice of thunder called to Nastasya, telling her to give him his overcoat, his new hat, and his stick. "I can bear no more," he said in a breaking voice. I can't. I am going myself." "Where?" I cried, jumping up too. "To Lembke. Cher, I ought, I am obliged.
It's my duty. I am a citizen and a man, not a worthless chip. I have rights. I want my rights. For 20 years I've not insisted on my rights. All my life I've neglected them criminally, but now I'll demand them. He must tell me everything, everything. He received a telegram. He dare not torture me. If so, let him arrest me. Let him arrest me." He stamped and vociferated almost with shrieks. "I approve of what you say," I said, speaking as calmly as possible, on purpose, though I was very much afraid for him. "Certainly it is better than sitting here in such misery, but I can't approve of your state of mind. Just see what you look like and in what a state you are going there. Il faut être digne et calme avec Lembke. You really might rush at someone there and bite him." "I am giving myself up. I am walking straight into the jaws of the lion." "I'll go with you." "I expected no less of you. I accept your sacrifice, the sacrifice of a true friend. But only as far as the house, only as far as the house. You ought not, you have no right to compromise yourself further by being my confederate. Oh, croyez moi, je serai calme. I feel that I am at this moment à la hauteur de tout ce qu'il y a de plus sacré." "I may perhaps go into the house with you," I interrupted him. "I had a message from their stupid committee yesterday through Vysotsky that they reckon on me and invite me to the fête to morrow as one of the stewards, or whatever it is, one of the 6 young men whose duty it is to look after the trays, wait on the ladies, take the guests to their places, and wear a rosette of crimson and white ribbon on the left shoulder. I meant to refuse, but now why shouldn't I go into the house on the excuse of seeing Yulia Mihailovna herself about it? So we will go in together." He listened, nodding, but I think he understood nothing. We stood on the threshold. "Cher," he stretched out his arm to the lamp before the ikon. "Cher, I have never believed in this, but so be it, so be it." He crossed himself. "Allons!" "Well, that's better so," I thought, as I went out on to the steps with him. "The fresh air will do him good on the way, and we shall calm down, turn back, and go home to bed." But I reckoned without my host. On the way an adventure occurred which agitated Stepan Trofimovitch even more, and finally determined him to go on, so that I should never have expected of our friend so much spirit as he suddenly displayed that morning. Poor friend, kind‐hearted friend! End of Chapter 9. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Part II, Chapter 10, Section 1a, of The Possessed by Fyodor Dostoevsky, translated by Constance Garnett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Part II, Chapter 10, Filibusters, A Fatal Morning. Section 1a. The adventure that befell us on the way was also a surprising one. But I must tell the story in due order. An hour before Stepan Trofimovitch and I came out into the street, a crowd of people, the hands from Shpiegelin's factory, 70 or more in number, had been marching through the town, and had been an object of curiosity to many spectators. They walked intentionally in good order and almost in silence. Afterwards it was asserted that these 70 had been elected out of the whole number of factory hands, amounting to about 900, to go to the governor and to try and get from him, in the absence of their employer, a just settlement of their grievances against the manager, who, in closing the factory and dismissing the workmen, had cheated them all in an impudent way, a fact which has since been proved conclusively. Some people still deny that there was any election of delegates, maintaining that 70 was too large a number to elect, and that the crowd simply consisted of those who had been most unfairly treated, and that they only came to ask for help in their own case, so that the general mutiny of the factory workers, about which there was such an uproar later on, had never existed at all. Others fiercely maintained that these 70 men were not simple strikers, but revolutionists. That is, not merely that they were the most turbulent, but that they must have been worked upon by seditious manifestoes. The fact is, it is still uncertain whether there had been any outside influence or incitement at work or not. My private opinion is that the workmen had not read the seditious manifestoes at all, and if they had read them would not have understood one word,
for one reason, because the authors of such literature write very obscurely in spite of the boldness of their style. But as the workmen really were in a difficult plight, and the police to whom they appealed would not enter into their grievances, what could be more natural than their idea of going in a body to the General himself, if possible, with a petition at their head, forming up in an orderly way before his door, and as soon as he showed himself, all falling on their knees and crying out to him as to Providence itself? To my mind, there's no need to see in this a mutiny or even a deputation, for it's a traditional, historical mode of action. The Russian people have always loved to parley with the General himself for the mere satisfaction of doing so, regardless of how the conversation may end. And so I am quite convinced that, even though Pyotr Stepanovitch, Liputin, and perhaps some others, perhaps even Fedka too, had been flitting about among the workpeople talking to them, and there is fairly good evidence of this, they had only approached 2, 3, 5 at the most, trying to sound them, and nothing had come of their conversation. As for the mutiny they advocated, if the factory workers did understand anything of their propaganda, they would have left off listening to it at once as to something stupid that had nothing to do with them. Fedka was a different matter. He had more success, I believe, than Pyotr Stepanovitch. Two workmen are now known for a fact to have assisted Fedka in causing the fire in the town which occurred 3 days afterwards, and a month later 3 men who had worked in the factory were arrested for robbery and arson in the province. But if in these cases Fedka did lure them to direct and immediate action, he could only have succeeded with these 5, for we have heard of nothing of the sort being done by others. Be that as it may, the whole crowd of workpeople had at last reached the open space in front of the governor's house, and were drawn up there in silence and good order. Then, gaping open-mouthed at the front door, they waited. I am told that as soon as they halted they took off their caps, that is, a good half hour before the appearance of the governor, who, as ill luck would have it, was not at home at the moment. The police made their appearance at once. At first individual policemen, and then as large a contingent of them as could be gathered together. They began, of course, by being menacing, ordering them to break up. But the workmen remained obstinately, like a flock of sheep at a fence, and replied laconically that they had come to see the General himself. It was evident that they were firmly determined. The unnatural shouting of the police ceased, and was quickly succeeded by deliberations, mysterious whispered instructions, and stern, fussy perplexity, which wrinkled the brows of the police officers. The head of the police preferred to await the arrival of the governor himself. It was not true that he galloped to the spot with 3 horses at full speed, and began hitting out right and left before he alighted from his carriage. It's true that he used to dash about, and was fond of dashing about at full speed in a carriage with a yellow back, and while his trace horses, who were so trained to carry their heads that they looked positively perverted, galloped more and more frantically, rousing the enthusiasm of all the shopkeepers in the bazaar, he would rise up in the carriage, stand erect, holding on by a strap which had been fixed on purpose at the side, and with his right arm extended into space like a figure on a monument, survey the town majestically. But in the present case he did not use his fists, and though as he got out of the carriage he could not refrain from a forcible expression, this was simply done to keep up his popularity. There is a still more absurd story that soldiers were brought up with bayonets, and that a telegram was sent for artillery and Cossacks. Those are legends which are not believed now even by those who invented them. It's an absurd story, too, that barrels of water were brought from the fire brigade, and that people were drenched with water from them. The simple fact is that Ilya Ilyitch shouted in his heat that he wouldn't let one of them come dry out of the water. Probably this was the foundation of the barrel legend which got into the columns of the Petersburg and Moscow newspapers. Probably the most accurate version was that at first all the available police formed a cordon round the crowd, and a messenger was sent for Lembke, a police superintendent, who dashed off in the carriage belonging to the head of the police on the way to Skvoreshniki, knowing that Lembke had gone there in his carriage half an hour before. But I must confess that I am still unable to answer the question how they could at first sight, from the first moment, have transformed an insignificant, that is to say, an ordinary crowd of petitioners, even though there were several of them, into a rebellion which threatened to shake the foundations of the state. Why did Lembke himself rush at that idea when he arrived 20 minutes after the messenger? I imagine, but again it's only my private opinion, that it was to the interest of Ilya Ilyitch, who was a crony of the factory manager's, to represent the crowd in this light to Lembke, in order to prevent him from going into the case. And Lembke himself had put the idea into his head. In the course of the last 2 days he had had 2 unusual and mysterious conversations with him. It is true they were exceedingly obscure, but Ilya Ilyitch was able to gather from them that the governor had thoroughly made up his mind that there were political manifestoes, and that Shpigulin's factory hands were being incited to a socialist rising, and that he was so persuaded of it that he would perhaps have regretted it if the story had turned out to be nonsense. "He wants to get distinction in Petersburg," our wily Ilya Ilyitch thought to himself as he left Von Lembke. "Well, that just suits me." But I am convinced that poor Andrey Antonovitch would not have desired a rebellion even for the sake of distinguishing himself. He was a most conscientious official, who had lived in a state of innocence up to the time of his marriage. And was it his fault that instead of an innocent allowance of wood from the government and an equally innocent Minnchen, a princess of 40 summers had raised him to her level? I know almost for certain that the unmistakable symptoms of the mental condition which brought poor Andrey Antonovitch to a well known establishment in Switzerland, where, I am told, he is now regaining his energies, were first apparent on that fatal morning. But once we admit that unmistakable signs of something were visible that morning, it may well be allowed that similar symptoms may have been evident the day before, though not so clearly. I happen to know from the most private sources, well, you may assume that Yulia Mihailovna later on, not in triumph but almost in remorse, for a woman is incapable of complete remorse, revealed part of it to me herself, that Andrey Antonovitch had gone into his wife's room in the middle of the previous night, past 2 o'clock in the morning, had waked her up and had insisted on her listening to his ultimatum. He demanded it so insistently that she was obliged to get up from her bed in indignation and curl papers, and, sitting down on a couch, she had to listen, though with sarcastic disdain. Only then she grasped for the first time how far gone her Andrey Antonovitch was, and was secretly horrified. She ought to have thought what she was about and have been softened, but she concealed her horror and was more obstinate than ever. Like every wife, she had her own method of treating Andrey Antonovitch, which she had tried more than once already, and with it driven him to frenzy. Yulia Mihailovna's method was that of contemptuous silence, for 1 hour, 2, a whole day, and almost for 3 days and nights, silence whatever happened, whatever he said, whatever he did, even if he had clambered up to throw himself out of a 3-story window, a method unendurable for a sensitive man. Whether Yulia Mihailovna meant to punish her husband for his blunders of the last few days, and the jealous envy he, as the chief authority in the town, felt for her administrative abilities, whether she was indignant at his criticism of her behaviour with the young people and local society generally, and lack of comprehension of her subtle and far-sighted political aims, or was angry with his stupid and senseless jealousy of Pyotr Stepanovitch, however that may have been, she made up her mind not to be softened even now, in spite of its being 3 o'clock at night, and though Andrey Antonovitch was in a state of emotion such as she had never seen him in before. Pacing up and down in all directions over the rugs of her boudoir, beside himself, he poured out everything, everything, quite disconnectedly, it's true, but everything that had been rankling in his heart, for "it was outrageous." He began by saying that he was a laughing-stock to every one and was being led by the nose. "Curse the expression," he squealed, at once catching her smile. "Let it stand, it's true. No, madam, the time has come. Let me tell you it's not a time for laughter and feminine arts now. We are not in the boudoir of a mincing lady, but like 2 abstract creatures in a balloon who have met to speak the truth." He was no doubt confused, and could not find the right words for his ideas, however just they were. "It is you, madam." you who have destroyed my happy past. I took up this post simply for your sake, for the sake of your ambition. You smile sarcastically? Don't triumph. Don't be in a hurry. Let me tell you, madam, let me tell you that I should have been equal to this position, and not only this position, but a dozen positions like it. For I have abilities. But with you, madam, with you, it's impossible. For with you here I have no abilities. There cannot be two centres, and you have created two, one of mine and one in your boudoir, two centres of power, madam, but I won't allow it. I won't allow it. In the service, as in marriage, there must be one centre. Two are impossible. How have you repaid me?" he went on. "Our marriage has been nothing but your proving to me all the time, every hour, that I am a nonentity, a fool, and even a rascal. And I have been all the time, every hour, forced in a degrading way to prove to you that I am not a nonentity, not a fool at all, and that I impress every one with my honourable character. Isn't that degrading for both sides?" At this point he began rapidly stamping with both feet on the carpet, so that Yulia Mihailovna was obliged to get up with stern dignity. He subsided quickly, but passed to being pathetic, and began sobbing. Yes, sobbing, beating himself on the breast almost for 5 minutes, getting more and more frantic at Yulia Mihailovna's profound silence. At last he made a fatal blunder and let slip that he was jealous of Pyotr Stepanovitch. Realizing that he had made an utter fool of himself, he became savagely furious, and shouted that he would not allow them to deny God, and that he would send her salon of irresponsible infidels packing, that the governor of a province was bound to believe in God, and so his wife was too, that he wouldn't put up with these young men, that you, madam, for the sake of your own dignity, ought to have thought of your husband, and to have stood up for his intelligence even if he were a man of poor abilities, and I'm by no means a man of poor abilities. And yet it's your doing that every one here despises me. It was you who put them all up to it. He shouted that he would annihilate the woman question, that he would eradicate every trace of it, that tomorrow he would forbid and break up their silly fête for the benefit of the governesses, damn them, that the first governess he came across tomorrow morning he would drive out of the province with a Cossack. "I'll make a point of it," he shrieked. "Do you know," he screamed, "do you know that your rascals are inciting men at the factory, and that I know it? Let me tell you, I know the names of 4 of these rascals, and that I am going out of my mind, hopelessly, hopelessly." End of Part 2, Chapter 10, Section 1A. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Part 2, Chapter 10, Section 1B of The Possessed by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Constance Garnett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Part 2, Chapter 10, Filibusters. A Fatal Morning. Section 1B. But at this point Yulia Mihailovna suddenly broke her silence, and sternly announced that she had long been aware of these criminal designs, and that it was all foolishness, and that he had taken it too seriously, and that as for "these mischievous fellows," she knew not only those 4, but all of them (it was a lie), but that she had not the faintest intention of going out of her mind on account of it, but, on the contrary, had all the more confidence in her intelligence, and hoped to bring it all to a harmonious conclusion, to encourage the young people, to bring them to reason, to show them suddenly and unexpectedly that their designs were known, and then to point out to them new aims for rational and more noble activity. Oh, how can I describe the effect of this on Andrey Antonovitch? Hearing that Pyotr Stepanovitch had duped him again and had made a fool of him so coarsely, that he had told her much more than he had told him, and sooner than him, and that perhaps Pyotr Stepanovitch was the chief instigator of all these criminal designs, he flew into a frenzy. "Senseless but malignant woman!" he cried, snapping his bonds at one blow. "Let me tell you, I shall arrest your worthless lover at once. I shall put him in fetters and send him to the fortress, or I shall jump out of a window before your eyes this minute." Yulia Mihailovna, turning green with anger,
greeted this tirade at once with a burst of prolonged, ringing laughter, going off into peals such as one hears at the French theatre when a Parisian actress, imported for a fee of 100,000 to play a coquette, laughs in her husband's face for daring to be jealous of her. Von Lembke rushed to the window, but suddenly stopped as though rooted to the spot, folded his arms across his chest, and, white as a corpse, looked with a sinister gaze at the laughing lady. "Do you know, Yulia, do you know," he said in a gasping and suppliant voice, "do you know that even I can do something?" But at the renewed and even louder laughter that followed his last words, he clenched his teeth, groaned, and suddenly rushed, not towards the window, but at his spouse, with his fist raised. He did not bring it down. No, I repeat again and again, no. But it was the last straw. He ran to his own room, not knowing what he was doing, flung himself, dressed as he was, face downwards on his bed, wrapped himself convulsively, head and all, in the sheet, and lay so for 2 hours, incapable of sleep, incapable of thought, with a load on his heart and blank, immovable despair in his soul. Now and then he shivered all over with an agonizing, feverish tremor. Disconnected and irrelevant things kept coming into his mind. At one minute he thought of the old clock which used to hang on his wall 15 years ago in Petersburg, and had lost the minute hand; at another of the cheerful clerk, Millebois, and how they had once caught a sparrow together in Alexandrovsky Park, and had laughed so that they could be heard all over the park, remembering that one of them was already a college assessor. I imagine that about 7 in the morning he must have fallen asleep without being aware of it himself, and must have slept with enjoyment, with agreeable dreams. Waking about 10 o'clock, he jumped wildly out of bed, remembered everything at once, and slapped himself on the head. He refused his breakfast, and would see neither Blum nor the chief of the police, nor the clerk who came to remind him that he was expected to preside over a meeting that morning. He would listen to nothing, and did not want to understand. He ran like one possessed to Yulia Mihailovna's part of the house. There Sophia Andropovna, an old lady of good family who had lived for years with Yulia Mihailovna, explained to him that his wife had set off at 10 o'clock that morning with a large company in 3 carriages to Varvara Petrovna Stavrogin's, to Skvoreshniki to look over the place, with a view to the second fête which was planned for a fortnight later, and that the visit to day had been arranged with Varvara Petrovna 3 days before. Overwhelmed with this news, Andrey Antonovitch returned to his study and impulsively ordered the horses. He could hardly wait for them to be got ready. His soul was hungering for Yulia Mihailovna, to look at her, to be near her for 5 minutes. Perhaps she would glance at him, notice him, would smile as before, forgive him. Oh, aren't the horses ready? Mechanically he opened a thick book lying on the table. He sometimes used to try his fortune in this way with a book, opening it at random and reading the 3 lines at the top of the right hand page. What turned up was "Tu es pour le mieux dans le milieu du monde possible." Voltaire, Candide. He uttered an ejaculation of contempt and ran to get into the carriage. "Skvoreshniki!" The coachman said afterwards that his master urged him on all the way. But as soon as they were getting near the mansion he suddenly told him to turn and drive back to the town, bidding him "drive fast, please drive fast." Before they reached the town wall, master told me to stop again, got out of the carriage, and went across the road into the field. I thought he felt ill, but he stopped and began looking at the flowers. And so he stood for a time. It was strange, really. I began to feel quite uneasy. This was the coachman's testimony. I remember the weather that morning. It was a cold, clear, but windy September morning. Before Andrey Antonovitch stretched a forbidding landscape of bare fields from which the crop had long been harvested. There were a few dying yellow flowers, pitiful relics blown about by the howling wind. Did he want to compare himself and his fate with those wretched flowers battered by the autumn and the forest? I don't think so; in fact I feel sure it was not so, and that he realised nothing about the flowers in spite of the evidence of the coachman and of the police superintendent, who drove up at that moment and asserted afterwards that he found the governor with a bunch of yellow flowers in his hand. This police superintendent, Flibusterov by name, was an ardent champion of authority, who had only recently come to our town, but had already distinguished himself and become famous by his inordinate zeal, by a certain vehemence in the execution of his duties, and his inveterate inebriety. Jumping out of the carriage and not the least disconcerted at the sight of what the governor was doing, he blurted out all in one breath with a frantic expression, yet with an air of conviction, that "there's an upset in the town." "Eh? What?" said Andrey Antonovitch, turning to him with a stern face, but without a trace of surprise or any recollection of his carriage and his coachman, as though he had been in his own study. "Police Superintendent Flibusterov, your Excellency. There's a riot in the town." "Filibusters?" Andrey Antonovitch said thoughtfully. "Just so, your Excellency. The Shpigulin men are making a riot." "The Shpigulin men?" The name Shpigulin seemed to remind him of something. He started and put his finger to his forehead. "The Shpigulin men." In silence, and still plunged in thought, he walked without haste to the carriage, took his seat, and told the coachman to drive to the town. The police superintendent followed in the droshky. I imagined that he had vague impressions of many interesting things of all sorts on the way, but I doubt whether he had any definite idea or any settled intention as he drove into the open space in front of his house. But no sooner did he see the resolute and orderly ranks of the rioters, the cordon of police, the helpless, and perhaps purposely helpless, chief of police, and the general expectation of which he was the object, than all the blood rushed to his heart. With a pale face he stepped out of the carriage. "Caps off!" he said breathlessly and hardly audibly. "On your knees!" he squealed to the surprise of every one, to his own surprise too, and perhaps the very unexpectedness of the position was the explanation of what followed. Can a sledge on a switchback at carnival stop short as it flies down the hill? What made it worse, Andrey Antonovitch had been all his life serene in character, and never shouted or stamped at any one, and such people are always the most dangerous if it once happens that something sets their sledge sliding downhill. Everything was whirling before his eyes. "Filibusters!" he yelled still more shrilly and absurdly, and his voice broke. He stood, not knowing what he was going to do, but knowing and feeling in his whole being that he would certainly do something directly. "Lord!" was heard from the crowd. A lad began crossing himself. 3 or 4 men actually did try to kneel down, but the whole mass moved 3 steps forward, and suddenly all began talking at once. "Your Excellency! We were hired for a term! The manager! You mustn't say!" and so on and so on. It was impossible to distinguish anything. Alas, Andrey Antonovitch could distinguish nothing. The flowers were still in his hands. The riot was as real to him as the prison carts were to Stepan Trofimovitch. And flitting to and fro in the crowd of rioters who gazed open‐eyed at him, he seemed to see Pyotr Stepanovitch, who had egged them on. Pyotr Stepanovitch whom he hated, and whose image had never left him since yesterday. "Rods!" he cried even more unexpectedly. A dead silence followed. From the facts I have learnt and those I have conjectured, this must have been what happened at the beginning. But I have no such exact information for what followed, nor can I conjecture it so easily. There are some facts, however. In the first place, rods were brought on the scene with strange rapidity. They had evidently been got ready beforehand in expectation by the intelligent chief of the police. Not more than 2 or at most 3 were actually flogged. However, that fact I wish to lay stress on. It's an absolute fabrication to say that the whole crowd of rioters, or at least half of them, were punished. It is a nonsensical story, too, that a poor but respectable lady was caught as she passed by and promptly thrashed. Yet I read myself an account of this incident afterwards among the provincial items of a Petersburg newspaper. Many people in the town talked of an old woman called Avdotya Petrovna Tarapygin, who lived in the almshouse by the cemetery. She was said, on her way home from visiting a friend, to have forced her way into the crowd of spectators through natural curiosity. Seeing what was going on, she cried out, "What a shame!" and spat on the ground. For this it was said she had been seized and flogged too. This story not only appeared in print, but in our excitement we positively got up a subscription for her benefit. I subscribed 20 kopecks myself. And would you believe it? It appears now that there was no old woman called Tarapygin living in the almshouse at all. I went to inquire at the almshouse by the cemetery myself. They had never heard of any one called Tarapygin there, and what's more, they were quite offended when I told them the story that was going round. I mention this fabulous Avdotya Petrovna because what happened to her, if she really had existed, very nearly happened to Stepan Trofimovitch. Possibly, indeed, his adventure may have been at the bottom of the ridiculous tale about the old woman; that is, as the gossip went on growing, he was transformed into this old dame. What I find most difficult to understand is how he came to slip away from me as soon as he got into the square. As I had a misgiving of something very unpleasant, I wanted to take him round the square straight to the entrance to the governor's, but my own curiosity was roused, and I stopped only for 1 minute to question the first person I came across, and suddenly I looked round and found Stepan Trofimovitch no longer at my side. Instinctively I darted off to look for him in the most dangerous place; something made me feel that his sledge, too, was flying downhill. And I did, as a fact, find him in the very centre of things. I remember I seized him by the arm, but he looked quietly and proudly at me with an air of immense authority. "Cher," he pronounced in a voice which quivered on a breaking note, "if they are dealing with people so unceremoniously before us, in an open square, what is to be expected from that man, for instance, if he happens to act on his own authority?" And shaking with indignation and with an intense desire to defy them, he pointed a menacing, accusing finger at Flibusterov, who was gazing at us open eyed 2 paces away. "That man!" cried the latter, blind with rage. "What man? And who are you?" He stepped up to him, clenching his fist. "Who are you?" he roared ferociously, hysterically, and desperately. I must mention that he knew Stepan Trofimovitch perfectly well by sight. Another moment and he would have certainly seized him by the collar, but luckily, hearing him shout, Lembke turned his head. He gazed intensely but with perplexity at Stepan Trofimovitch, seeming to consider something, and suddenly he shook his hand impatiently. Flibusterov was checked. I drew Stepan Trofimovitch out of the crowd, though perhaps he may have wished to retreat himself. "Home, home," I insisted. "It was certainly thanks to Lembke that we were not beaten." "Go, my friend. I am to blame for exposing you to this. You have a future and a career of a sort before you, while I... mon heure est sonné." He resolutely mounted the governor's steps. The hall porter knew me. I said that we both wanted to see Yulia Mihailovna. We sat down in the waiting room and waited. I was unwilling to leave my friend, but I thought it unnecessary to say anything more to him. He had the air of a man who had consecrated himself to certain death for the sake of his country. We sat down, not side by side, but in different corners, I nearer to the entrance, he at some distance facing me, with his head bent in thought, leaning lightly on his stick. He held his wide brimmed hat in his left hand. We sat like that for 10 minutes. End of Part 2, Chapter 10, Section 1b. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Part 2, Chapter 10, Sections 2 and 3 of The Possessed by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Constance Garnett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Part 2, Chapter 10. Filibusters. A Fatal Morning. Sections 2 and 3. Lembke suddenly came in with rapid steps, accompanied by the chief of police, looked absent‐mindedly at us, and, taking no notice of us, was about to pass into his study on the right. But Stepan Trofimovitch stood before him blocking his way. The tall figure of Stepan Trofimovitch, so unlike other people, made an impression. Lembke stopped. "Who is this?" he muttered, puzzled, as if he were questioning the chief of police, though he did not turn his head towards him and was all the time gazing at Stepan Trofimovitch. "Retired college assessor, Stepan Trofimovitch Verhovensky, your Excellency," answered Stepan Trofimovitch, bowing majestically.
His Excellency went on staring at him with a very blank expression, however. "What is it?" And with the curtness of a great official he turned his ear to Stepan Trofimovitch with disdainful impatience, taking him for an ordinary person with a written petition of some sort. "I was visited, and my house was searched to day by an official acting in your Excellency's name. Therefore I am desirous..." "Name? Name?" Lembke asked impatiently, seeming suddenly to have an inkling of something. Stepan Trofimovitch repeated his name still more majestically. "Ah, it's that hotbed! You have shown yourself, sir, in such a light. Are you a professor? A professor?" "I once had the honour of giving some lectures to the young men of the X university." "The young men?" Lembke seemed to start, though I am ready to bet that he grasped very little of what was going on, or even, perhaps, did not know with whom he was talking. "That, sir, I won't allow," he cried, suddenly getting terribly angry. "I won't allow young men. It's all these manifestoes. It's an assault on society, sir, a piratical attack, filibustering. What is your request?" "On the contrary, your wife requested me to read something to morrow at her fête. I've not come to make a request, but to ask for my rights." "At the fête? There'll be no fête. I won't allow your fête. A lecture? A lecture?" he screamed furiously. "I should be very glad if you would speak to me rather more politely, your Excellency, without stamping or shouting at me as though I were a boy." "Perhaps you understand whom you are speaking to?" said Lembke, turning crimson. "Perfectly, your Excellency." "I am protecting society while you are destroying it. You! I remember about you, though. You used to be a tutor in the house of Madame Stavrogin." "Yes, I was in the position of tutor... in the house of Madame Stavrogin." "And have been for 20 years the hotbed of all that has now accumulated... all the fruits. I believe I saw you just now in the square. You'd better look out, sir, you'd better look out. Your way of thinking is well known. You may be sure that I keep my eye on you. I cannot allow your lectures, sir, I cannot. Don't come with such requests to me." He would have passed on again. "I repeat that your Excellency is mistaken. It was your wife who asked me to give, not a lecture, but a literary reading at the fête to morrow. But I decline to do so in any case now. I humbly request that you will explain to me, if possible, how, why, and for what reason I was subjected to an official search to day. Some of my books and papers, private letters to me, were taken from me and wheeled through the town in a barrel." "Who searched you?" said Lembke, starting and returning to full consciousness of the position. He suddenly flushed all over. He turned quickly to the chief of police. At that moment the long, stooping, and awkward figure of Blum appeared in the doorway. "Why, this official here," said Stepan Trofimovitch, indicating him. Blum came forward with a face that admitted his responsibility but showed no contrition. "Vous ne faites que des bêtises," Lembke threw at him in a tone of vexation and anger, and suddenly he was transformed and completely himself again. "Excuse me," he muttered, utterly disconcerted and turning absolutely crimson. All this was probably a mere blunder, a misunderstanding, nothing but a misunderstanding." "Your Excellency," observed Stepan Trofimovitch, "once when I was young I saw a characteristic incident. In the corridor of a theatre a man ran up to another and gave him a sounding smack in the face before the whole public. Perceiving at once that his victim was not the person whom he had intended to chastise, but someone quite different, who only slightly resembled him, he pronounced angrily, with the haste of one whose moments are precious, as your Excellency did just now, 'I've made a mistake. Excuse me, it was a misunderstanding, nothing but a misunderstanding.' And when the offended man remained resentful and cried out, he observed to him with extreme annoyance, 'Why, I tell you it was a misunderstanding. What are you crying out about?'" "That's very amusing, of course." Lembke gave a wry smile. "But can't you see how unhappy I am myself?" He almost screamed and seemed about to hide his face in his hands. This unexpected and piteous exclamation, almost a sob, was almost more than one could bear. It was probably the first moment since the previous day that he had full, vivid consciousness of all that had happened, and it was followed by complete humiliating despair that could not be disguised. Who knows, in another minute he might have sobbed aloud. For the first moment Stepan Trofimovitch looked wildly at him; then he suddenly bowed his head and in a voice pregnant with feeling pronounced: "Your Excellency, don't trouble yourself with my petulant complaint, and only give orders for my books and letters to be restored to me." He was interrupted. At that very instant Yulia Mihailovna returned and entered noisily with all the party which had accompanied her. But at this point I should like to tell my story in as much detail as possible. Section 3. In the first place, the whole company who had filled 3 carriages crowded into the waiting room. There was a special entrance to Yulia Mihailovna's apartments on the left as one entered the house, but on this occasion they all went through the waiting room, and I imagine, just because Stepan Trofimovitch was there, and because all that had happened to him as well as the Shpigulin affair had reached Yulia Mihailovna's ears as she drove into the town. Lyamshin, who for some misdemeanour had not been invited to join the party, and so knew all that had been happening in the town before anyone else, brought her the news. With spiteful glee he hired a wretched Cossack nag and hastened on the way to Skvoreshniki to meet the returning cavalcade with the diverting intelligence. I fancy that, in spite of her lofty determination, Yulia Mihailovna was a little disconcerted on hearing such surprising news, but probably only for an instant. The political aspect of the affair, for instance, could not cause her uneasiness. Pyotr Stepanovitch had impressed upon her 3 or 4 times that the Shpigulin ruffians ought to be flogged, and Pyotr Stepanovitch certainly had for some time past been a great authority in her eyes. "But anyway, I shall make him pay for it," she doubtless reflected, the "he," of course, referring to her spouse. I must observe in passing that on this occasion, as though purposely, Pyotr Stepanovitch had taken no part in the expedition, and no one had seen him all day. I must mention too, by the way, that Varvara Petrovna had come back to the town with her guests, in the same carriage with Yulia Mihailovna, in order to be present at the last meeting of the committee which was arranging the fête for the next day. She too must have been interested, and perhaps even agitated by the news about Stepan Trofimovitch communicated by Lyamshin. The hour of reckoning for Andrey Antonovitch followed at once. Alas! He felt that from the first glance at his admirable wife. With an open air and an enchanting smile she went quickly up to Stepan Trofimovitch, held out her exquisitely gloved hand, and greeted him with a perfect shower of flattering phrases, as though the only thing she cared about that morning was to make haste to be charming to Stepan Trofimovitch, because at last she saw him in her house. There was not one hint of the search that morning; it was as though she knew nothing of it. There was not one word to her husband, not one glance in his direction, as though he had not been in the room. What's more, she promptly confiscated Stepan Trofimovitch and carried him off to the drawing room, as though he had had no interview with Lembke, or as though it was not worth prolonging if he had. I repeat again, I think that in this Yulia Mihailovna, in spite of her aristocratic tone, made another great mistake, and Karmazinov particularly did much to aggravate this. He had taken part in the expedition at Yulia Mihailovna's special request, and in that way had incidentally paid his visit to Varvara Petrovna, and she was so poor‐spirited as to be perfectly delighted at it. On seeing Stepan Trofimovitch he called out from the doorway; he came in behind the rest, and pressed forward to embrace him, even interrupting Yulia Mihailovna. What years, what ages! At last! Excellent ami! He made as though to kiss him, offering his cheek, of course, and Stepan Trofimovitch was so fluttered that he could not avoid saluting it. "Cher," he said to me that evening, recalling all the events of that day, "I wondered at that moment which of us was the most contemptible: he, embracing me only to humiliate me, or I, despising him and his face, and kissing it on the spot, though I might have turned away. Foo!" "Come, tell me about yourself, tell me everything," Karmazinov drawled and lisped, as though it were possible for him on the spur of the moment to give an account of 25 years of his life. But this foolish trifling was the height of chic. "Remember that the last time we met was at the Granovsky dinner in Moscow. and that 24 years have passed since then. Stepan Trofimovitch began very reasonably, and consequently not at all in the same chic style. "Ce cher homme," Karmazinov interrupted with shrill familiarity, squeezing his shoulder with exaggerated friendliness. "Make haste and take us to your room, Yulia Mihailovna. There he'll sit down and tell us everything." "And yet I was never at all intimate with that peevish old woman," Stepan Trofimovitch went on complaining to me that same evening, shaking with anger. "We were almost boys, and I'd begun to detest him even then, just as he had me, of course." Yulia Mihailovna's drawing room filled up quickly. Varvara Petrovna was particularly excited, though she tried to appear indifferent. But I caught her once or twice glancing with hatred at Karmazinov and with wrath at Stepan Trofimovitch, the wrath of anticipation, the wrath of jealousy and love. If Stepan Trofimovitch had blundered this time and had let Karmazinov make him look small before every one, I believe she would have leapt up and beaten him. I have forgotten to say that Liza, too, was there, and I had never seen her more radiant, carelessly light hearted and happy. Mavriky Nikolaevitch was there too, of course. In the crowd of young ladies and rather vulgar young men who made up Yulia Mihailovna's usual retinue, and among whom this vulgarity was taken for sprightliness and cheap cynicism for wit, I noticed two or three new faces: a very obsequious Pole who was on a visit in the town, a German doctor, a sturdy old fellow who kept loudly laughing with great zest at his own wit, and lastly, a very young princeling from Petersburg like an automaton figure, with the deportment of a state dignitary and a fearfully high collar. But it was evident that Yulia Mihailovna had a very high opinion of this visitor, and was even a little anxious of the impression her salon was making on him. "Cher Monsieur Karmazinov," said Stepan Trofimovitch, sitting in a picturesque pose on the sofa, and suddenly beginning to lisp as daintily as Karmazinov himself. "Cher Monsieur Karmazinov, the life of a man of our time and of certain convictions, even after an interval of 25 years, is bound to seem monotonous." The German went off into a loud abrupt guffaw like a neigh, evidently imagining that Stepan Trofimovitch had said something exceedingly funny. The latter gazed at him with studied amazement, but produced no effect on him whatever. The prince, too, looked at the German, turning head, collar and all towards him and putting up his pince nez, though without the slightest curiosity. "Is bound to seem monotonous," Stepan Trofimovitch intentionally repeated, drawling each word as deliberately and nonchalantly as possible. "And so my life has been throughout this quarter of a century, et comme on trouve partout plus de moi que de raison, and as I am entirely of this opinion, it has come to pass that throughout this quarter of a century I..." "C'est charmant, le moi," whispered Yulia Mihailovna, turning to Varvara Petrovna, who was sitting beside her. Varvara Petrovna responded with a look of pride. But Karmazinov could not stomach the success of the French phrase, and quickly and shrilly interrupted Stepan Trofimovitch. "As for me, I am quite at rest on that score, and for the past 7 years I've been settled at Karlsruhe. And last year, when it was proposed by the town council to lay down a new water pipe, I felt in my heart that this question of water pipes in Karlsruhe was dearer and closer to my heart than all the questions of my precious fatherland in this period of so‐called reform." "I can't help sympathising, though it goes against the grain," sighed Stepan Trofimovitch, bowing his head significantly. Yulia Mihailovna was triumphant. The conversation was becoming profound and taking a political turn. "A drain pipe?" the doctor inquired in a loud voice. "A water pipe, doctor, a water pipe, and I positively assisted them in drawing up the plan." The doctor went off into a deafening guffaw. Many people followed his example, laughing in the face of the doctor, who remained unconscious of it and was highly delighted that every one was laughing. "You must allow me to differ from you, Karmazinov," Yulia Mihailovna hastened to interpose. "Karlsruhe is all very well, but you are fond of mystifying people, and this time we don't believe you. What Russian writer has presented so many modern types, has brought forward so many contemporary problems, has put his finger on the most vital modern points which make up the type of the modern man of action? You, only you, and no one else. It's no use your assuring us of your coldness towards your own country and your ardent interest in the water pipes of Karlsruhe. Ha ha!" "Yes, no doubt," lisped Karmazinov. "I have portrayed in the character of Pogojov all the failings of the Slavophiles, and in the character of Nikodimov all the failings of the Westerners." "I say, hardly all," Lyamshin whispered slyly. "But I do this by the way, simply to while away the tedious hours and to satisfy the persistent demands of my fellow countrymen." "You are probably aware, Stepan Trofimovitch," Yulia Mihailovna went on enthusiastically, "that to morrow we shall have the delight of hearing the charming lines, one of the last of Semyon Yakovlevitch's exquisite literary inspirations. It's called 'Merci.' He announces in this piece that he will write no more, that nothing in the world will induce him to, if angels from heaven or, what's more, all the best society were to implore him to change his mind. In fact, he is laying down the pen for good, and this graceful 'Merci' is addressed to the public in grateful acknowledgment of the constant enthusiasm with which it has for so many years greeted his unswerving loyalty to true Russian thought." Yulia Mihailovna was the acme of bliss. "Yes, I shall make my farewell. I shall say my merci and depart, and there, in Karlsruhe, I shall close my eyes." Karmazinov was gradually becoming maudlin. Like many of our great writers, and there are numbers of them amongst us, he could not resist praise, and began to be limp at once, in spite of his penetrating wit. But I consider this is pardonable. They say that one of our Shakespeares positively blurted out in private conversation that "we great men can't do otherwise," and so on, and what's more, was unaware of it. There in Karlsruhe I shall close my eyes. When we have done our duty, all that's left for us great men is to make haste to close our eyes without seeking a reward. I shall do so too. "Give me the address, and I shall come to Karlsruhe to visit your tomb," said the German, laughing immoderately. "They send corpses by rail nowadays," one of the less important young men said unexpectedly. Lyamshin positively shrieked with delight. Yulia Mihailovna frowned. Nikolay Stavrogin walked in. "Why, I was told that you were locked up," he said aloud, addressing Stepan Trofimovitch before every one else. "No, it was a case of unlocking," jested Stepan Trofimovitch. "But I hope that what's happened will have no influence on what I asked you to do," Yulia Mihailovna put in again. "I trust that you will not let this unfortunate annoyance, of which I had no idea, lead you to disappoint our eager expectations, and deprive us of the enjoyment of hearing your reading at our literary matinée." "I don't know... I... now... Really, I am so unlucky, Varvara Petrovna. And only fancy, just when I was so longing to make the personal acquaintance of one of the most remarkable and independent intellects of Russia, and here Stepan Trofimovitch suddenly talks of deserting us." "Your compliment is uttered so audibly that I ought to pretend not to hear it," Stepan Trofimovitch said neatly. "But I cannot believe that my insignificant presence is so indispensable at your fête to morrow. However, I..." "Why, you'll spoil him!" cried Pyotr Stepanovitch, bursting into the room. "I've only just got him in hand, and in one morning he has been searched, arrested, taken by the collar by a policeman, and here ladies are cooing to him in the governor's drawing room. Every bone in his body is aching with rapture. In his wildest dreams he had never hoped for such good fortune. Now he'll begin informing against the socialists after this." "Impossible, Pyotr Stepanovitch. Socialism is too grand an idea to be unrecognised by Stepan Trofimovitch." Yulia Mihailovna took up the gauntlet with energy. "It's a great idea, but its exponents are not always great men. Et brisons là, mon cher," Stepan Trofimovitch ended, addressing his son and rising gracefully from his seat. But at this point an utterly unexpected circumstance occurred. Von Lembke had been in the room for some time, but seemed unnoticed by anyone, though every one had seen him come in. In accordance with her former plan, Yulia Mihailovna went on ignoring him. He took up his position near the door and with a stern face listened gloomily to the conversation. Hearing an allusion to the events of the morning, he began fidgeting uneasily, stared at the prince, obviously struck by his stiffly starched prominent collar, then suddenly he seemed to start on hearing the voice of Pyotr Stepanovitch and seeing him burst in. And no sooner had Stepan Trofimovitch uttered his phrase about socialists than Lembke went up to him, pushing against Lyamshin, who at once skipped out of the way with an affected gesture of surprise, rubbing his shoulder and pretending that he had been terribly bruised. "Enough!" said Von Lembke to Stepan Trofimovitch, vigorously gripping the hand of the dismayed gentleman and squeezing it with all his might in both of his. "Enough! The filibusters of our day are unmasked. Not another word. Measures have been taken." He spoke loudly enough to be heard by all the room, and concluded with energy. The impression he produced was poignant. Everybody felt that something was wrong. I saw Yulia Mihailovna turn pale; the effect was heightened by a trivial accident. After announcing that "measures" had been taken, Lembke turned sharply and walked quickly towards the door, but he had hardly taken 2 steps when he stumbled over a rug, swerved forward and almost fell. For a moment he stood still, looked at the rug at which he had stumbled, and, uttering a loud "Change it," went out of the room. Yulia Mihailovna ran after him. Her exit was followed by an uproar in which it was difficult to distinguish anything. Some said he was deranged, others that he was liable to attacks, others put their fingers to their forehead. Lyamshin in the corner put his 2 fingers above his forehead. People hinted at some domestic difficulties, in a whisper of course. No one took up his hat, all were waiting. I don't know what Yulia Mihailovna managed to do, but 5 minutes later she came back, doing her utmost to appear composed. She replied evasively that Andrey Antonovitch was rather excited, but that it meant nothing, that he had been like that from a child, that she knew much better, and that the fête next day would certainly cheer him up. Then followed a few flattering words to Stepan Trofimovitch simply from civility, and a loud invitation to the members of the committee to open the meeting now, at once. Only then all who were not members of the committee prepared to go home, but the painful incidents of this fatal day were not yet over. I noticed at the moment when Nikolay Stavrogin came in that Liza looked quickly and intently at him, and was for a long time unable to take her eyes off him. So much so that at last it attracted attention. I saw Mavriky Nikolaevitch bend over her from behind. He seemed to mean to whisper something to her, but evidently changed his intention and drew himself up quickly, looking round at every one with a guilty air. Nikolay Vsyevolodovitch, too, excited curiosity. His face was paler than usual, and there was a strangely absent‐minded look in his eyes. After flinging his question at Stepan Trofimovitch, he seemed to forget about him altogether, and I really believe he even forgot to speak to his hostess. He did not once look at Liza, not because he did not want to, but I am certain because he did not notice her either. And suddenly, after the brief silence that followed Yulia Mihailovna's invitation to open the meeting without loss of time, Liza's musical voice, intentionally loud, was heard. She called to Stavrogin: "Nikolay Vsyevolodovitch, a captain who calls himself a relation of yours, the brother of your wife, and whose name is Lebyadkin, keeps writing impertinent letters to me, complaining of you and offering to tell me some secrets about you. If he really is a connection of yours, please tell him not to annoy me, and save me from this unpleasantness." There was a note of desperate challenge in these words; every one realised it. The accusation was unmistakable, though perhaps it was a surprise to herself. She was like a man who shuts his eyes and throws himself from the roof. But Nikolay Stavrogin's answer was even more astounding. To begin with, it was strange that he was not in the least surprised and listened to Liza with unruffled attention. There was no trace of either confusion or anger in his face. Simply, firmly, even with an air of perfect readiness, he answered the fatal question. "Yes, I have the misfortune to be connected with that man. I have been the husband of his sister for nearly 5 years. You may be sure I will give him your message as soon as possible, and I'll answer for it that he shan't annoy you again." I shall never forget the horror that was reflected on the face of Varvara Petrovna. With a distracted air she got up from her seat, lifting up her right hand as though to ward off a blow. Nikolay Vsyevolodovitch looked at her, looked at Liza, at the spectators, and suddenly smiled with infinite disdain. He walked deliberately out of the room. Every one saw how Liza leapt up from the sofa as soon as he turned to go and unmistakably made a movement to run after him. But she controlled herself and did not run after him, she went quietly out of the room, without saying a word or even looking at anyone, accompanied, of course, by Mavriky Nikolaevitch, who rushed after her. The uproar and the gossip that night in the town I will not attempt to describe. Varvara Petrovna shut herself up in her town house, and Nikolay Vsyevolodovitch, it was said, went straight to Skvoreshniki without seeing his mother. Stepan Trofimovitch sent me that evening to cette chère amie to implore her to allow him to come to her, but she would not see me. He was terribly overwhelmed; he shed tears. "Such a marriage, such a marriage, such an awful thing in the family!" he kept repeating. He remembered Karmazinov, however, and abused him terribly. He set to work vigorously to prepare for the reading too, and the artistic temperament rehearsed before the looking glass and went over all the jokes and witticisms uttered in the course of his life which he had written down in a separate notebook, to insert into his reading next day. "My dear, I do this for the sake of a great idea," he said to me, obviously justifying himself. "Chère amie, I have been stationary for 25 years, and suddenly I've begun to move. Whither, I know not, but I've begun to move." End of Project Gutenberg, EBook of Expatriate in Bangor, Maine